Hey, it's 4:45 in the morning and I just got this done. 2 things before we start. You remember that thing I did with the trucks in Ukraine? They need more trucks. So, I'm getting more trucks. I'll explain fully in another video, but if you want to see me get drunk and drive across Poland at Mac Jesus, blasting Slavjank in a truck that will probably get blown up by drones the second I slide across the border, donate below, and it might happen. Or they might not let me drive after what happened the last time, but who knows?
Our lives and lives of Ukrainian civilians are highly dependent from your support.
Secondly, I know it's become a bit of a thing among intellectual circles these days to say unhelpful things like, oh, the left and the right don't really exist, it's all horseshoe, or more Ouroboros, but for some reason people say horseshoe because both sides of the horseshoe are the same. These people are really, really intelligent. The thing is, I could sit here for several hours and bore you all to tears by explaining who I mean when I say left and right. Or I could just say left and right, because you know exactly who I mean when I say these things. So in this video, I do say left and right quite a lot. If that bothers you, tough. I know this is a weird way to start a video, but the opening of H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu, incidentally one of my favourite books of all time, starts with the following.
The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have thus far harmed us little. But someday, the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our own frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age.
Yes, okay, I know Lovecraft was a massive racist when he wrote this. Never ask anyone about the name of his cat. But he does make a good point. Life is scary, and it can be very easy to embrace the mediocrity that we live in. Because when you fight the same battles every day, it becomes routine. It becomes familiar. Yes, the battles are never easy. Yes, they exhaust you, but you know how to fight them. You know how this game is played. It can be very hard to push yourself forward because even though there is every indication your life could be better, that comes with new challenges, new battles, ones you don't know how to fight. And that can be scary. So it becomes much easier to stay where you are, never moving on, never pushing yourself forward out of the fear of what that would bring. The struggle becomes the familiar, the mediocrity, the comfortable, and the darkness reassuring. And you embrace it. Each and every day, you embrace that struggle almost like it was an old friend. And to anyone you see doing the opposite, attempting to push forward with their life, that can seem almost like a fool's errand. Madness. As we get older, the world around us changes, often in ways that would make very little sense to us, and often in ways that would disgust our younger selves. And we can either choose to embrace those changes, go mad as Lovecraft put it, or we can retreat into the dark, into the ignorance that we find so comfortable. With that in mind, I want to introduce you to someone. He's called Timmy. Timmy, for the purposes of this narration, is a man. However, because this is an example and Timmy here is just a metaphor, he can exist as whatever you wish him to be. A woman, a pirate, a sea lion, the cover of the Rush album Clockwork Angels, 1983 Cyndi Lauper, or the man from the old Diet Coke adverts. It's up to you. But for my purposes, and to keep this going in a fairly straight line, Timmy is a child. Or at least now he is. Timmy will go to school, and he learns about the history of the world from his teachers. It's part of growing up to learn about the past, about your own past, about the history of your culture and your country, and this could often be framed as a celebration of the ideal. National pride can be quite a good thing if framed correctly. But not everything Timmy hears is going to be nice. He is going to learn of wars, of death, and genocide. But because he is a child, there is a limit to his frame of understanding. We can't expect him to grasp the sheer complexity of some events throughout history, and he would struggle to remember them if he was told. So, in a move the famous author of the Discworld series, Terry Pratchett, called Lies to Children, the narrative is simplified. He is given a rough outline of specific parts of history. Rough edges are smoothed down so he does not cut himself. Everything is simplified so that he can understand it without his fragile mind becoming overwhelmed. And narratives are created and emphasized because an 8-year-old at school understands the world around him in narratives. They understand bad and good, black and white, rich, poor, good versus evil, do and do not. And that's about it. To them, the world is about as complicated as the plot to a TV show and will run pretty much the same script. The bad guys are evil, they seem to get the upper hand, but at the last minute, good triumphs. There is nothing sinister about this teaching method, this is just how you teach things to an 8-year-old. You are free to take the opposite approach and explain all the full complexities of life to a child and see how far that gets you. There is a neurological response in the brain that protects you from overwhelming amounts of new information. Hence why, if you're attending a lecture or someone's trying to explain something that you really don't quite understand, you start to feel sleepy and you get distracted and you have no idea what was just said. But getting back to Timmy, because Timmy will grow up, and as he becomes a teenager, this is what stock photos count as a teenager, by the way, his mind will start to expand, and he will become more open to the complexities of the universe. He's beginning to learn that everything he knew as a child was incorrect. There is no black and white. There are only shades of grey. Everything is far larger and far more complicated than he was led to believe, and the things he once saw as the good paragons of virtue do not seem as unquestionably pure as they once were. But the mind has not yet grown enough to process this, so the subconscious takes over, and in an attempt to protect the mind from information overload, it forces it into an emotional state which bypasses that overwhelmed cognitive process. This is why teenagers struggle with depression more often. They are finally reaching a level of maturity where the complexities of the world are being exposed to them, but not making any sense. And instead, life feels completely overwhelming. For Timmy, finally breaking free of the shell of the naive he has lived in for so long, the world hurts. But again, Timmy has yet to fully mature into an adult. He still understands the world in those original narratives. Yes, the narratives are a little more complicated now, but he still clings onto them because they offer a sense of simplicity in the growing complexity and darkness of the world around him. Bad people are bad because money and power, and everyone goes along with it because they are stupid. If they were less stupid or stopped to think about things for even just a moment, then perhaps the world wouldn't be so evil. This is the reality that Timmy likes to envision. You may have seen examples of this in any university campus, where students latch onto a cause but have very bizarre ideas on how to go about helping this cause, because they don't understand enough on how humanity and the world works to affect great change. So they opt instead just to shout at people or do these really attention-seeking antics. But Timmy has a hobby. His hobby is World War II history, and one day while reading he finds something he did not expect. The fact that many American states, the good guys of World War II he has always been told, had an oppressive eugenics program. Forced confinement, chemical castration, and racially based internment camps, all of which have the same look and feel as those implemented by the Nazis. And his mind breaks. He does not know how to process this information. The idea that we, the good guys, are different from the bad guys has just been challenged. So the next day he asks his teacher about it, and the response he receives will be boiled down to two potentials. Number one, his teacher will promote a sense of discovery and encourage Timmy to keep digging, do more research and see if what he learned was true, look for more sources, question the one source you have, and if it does turn out to be true, what can we learn from it? Why did such things exist back in those days? How have we developed as a people to move away from such ideals? And how can we assure that we never return back to a point where people start to think that maybe those were good ideas? Or two, he gets brushed off. His teacher is too tired to deal with a subject so complicated and asks Timmy just to not think about it and concentrate on his schoolwork. We all know what is most likely. And when faced with that second potential, Timmy's mind will produce one of two results. The first is the realization that his understanding of the matter is potentially limited, that his teacher is going to be useless in the situation, so he needs to do further research by himself, pursue his own academic growth as a hobby. Or scream internally, "Everything I know is a lie! We have all been lied to! What is my teacher hiding from me? What is everyone else hiding from us?" Again, we all know what is the most likely outcome. By the time Timmy is an adult, he is a completely different man. Where history is concerned, no one pulls the wool over his eyes. He has rejected the simplistic narratives force-fed to him by the propagandists when he was young and vulnerable. He is his own man now, and he figures things out for himself. But the initial problem has not been solved. He has simply devolved into the Dunning-Kruger effect and believes himself much more open-minded and much more rational than he actually is. He is in the grip of something called second opinion bias, a bias where the victim believes that almost every common narrative believed by the general public is false or misleading, and thus any challenge to that, any alternate, any second opinion must be the real truth. And Timmy, poor Timmy, he's got it bad. He doesn't believe what everybody else does. He has made up his own mind, and the culture that surrounds him will constantly justify this in his mind, that everyone else is a sheep going along with that common narrative, whereas he is the true free thinker, because he doesn't choose to believe what they do. And this will continue so long as he always thinks the opposite of what the mainstream media claims is the truth, so long as he always holds that second opinion. He is becoming a contrarian. He cannot ever agree with the common narrative, even if it is so blatantly true, because that would be to show weakness. That would cast into doubt his objectivity, so he must always choose that second opinion, regardless of what dark paths it leads him down, retreating back into that ideology, that darkness, out of the sheer sense of comfort, and let's not pad it, sense of superiority it provides. I am not some sheep. I am not a normie like you. And through all of this, Timmy's understanding of history persists in being fragmentary, incomplete, and perhaps worst of all, selective. He gravitates towards books with titles like Lies My School Told Me, The Secret History of the Mayans, or whatever. He follows Twitter accounts like What the Media Hide, and posts a lot on Truth Social, reveling in the community which surrounds and supports his now ego-driven delusion. He glosses over evidence that could support the common narratives he's already consciously rejected, while delighting in evidence that confirms his current set of views. He distrusts anyone writing under the establishment label, and instead gravitates towards people who have been kicked out of academic institutions, regardless of reasoning, viewing them as mavericks and rebels, silenced for going against the system. To Timmy, the mainstream, the media, academia, and so forth will always be propagandists, in on some big conspiracy purposely constructed to blind specifically people like him. He has yet to reach the final stage of understanding, in what we used to call the three pits of historical ignorance. An example the original poster in r/bad history that I stole this from cited was that of the American Civil War. In elementary school you learn it was about slavery. In high school you find out that it wasn't all about slavery, it was actually a lot more complicated, and in university you discover that, on the whole, it really was just all about slavery. This is true of many other subjects as well. One you might understand better is that when you're a child, the German Second World War Tiger tank is the best tank of World War II. It has the best armor, the best gun. It might not be as fast, but it's fast enough. In high school, you question this logic. The Tiger is not as good as you think. It's mechanically unreliable. It was resource intensive to build, difficult to operate. They were never available in any real number, etc., etc. But when you get to university or just into that third stage of understanding, you realize the Tiger tank was, on the whole, a pretty good vehicle. And that can be difficult to accept, especially when you've spent your life as a teenager laughing at the first group, still wallowing in the ignorance of a child, now finding yourself having to agree with them, and argue not with your younger self who was a child and who can be forgiven for having childish beliefs, but the person you were when you believed you were becoming more mature and more rational. The thing you were taught as a child is not wrong. It's not a lie. The conclusion conclusion was correct. It's just the thing that brought you to that conclusion was simplified for you, and it's actually a lot more complicated than you were taught. Yes, you've rejected the simplicity, and in doing so you've opened your mind up to the idea that the conclusion might be wrong, but ultimately once you've understood enough of the subject matter, you realize that generations of historians and professors were in fact not wrong, you were not lied to as a child, everything was just simplified for you. And it's up to you if you accept this rather bizarre yet kind of fun way in which societal understanding of complicated subjects work, or you dive down into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theorists where everything is a lie. What is the real truth we are not being told? Rejecting any evidence that leads you back to the original conclusion because it's easier to stay in the fight than admit you were wrong. You can retreat back into the safety and security of the darkness, or you can embrace madness. Timmy is still stuck in his high school mind process, in that second trench of ignorance. And as he gets older, he will constantly reinforce that this is the way things are. He will surround himself with the media, narratives, and friends who all agree with him, giving him the illusion of safety and comfort in his belief, something we call confirmation bias. And he will be naturally suspicious of anything that challenges what he thinks he already knows. Someone making a YouTube video citing dozens of sources or academic professors who have spent 30 years in their field showing that the fact of slavery was absolutely central to the Confederate cause looks to Timmy like someone just preaching that grade school narrative again, and faces an uphill battle from the very start from every Timmy in America. He's just saying the war's about slavery again, but that's just the bullshit they filled your head with as a child. Hasn't he read any real history? You cite a few reference books that you must read, and then fedoras are getting tipped all over the place, and here we are, when a historical shitposter YouTuber known for being loud and dramatic has to sit down and talk about cultural Marxism. Yay. So before we begin, and I must apologise, this video is going to have like 3 introductions. Many of you are probably wondering, what on earth am I doing? Why am I making a video on cultural Marxism? I am a semi-accurate, whimsical military historian known for ranting about tanks and jets. Cultural Marxism is so far out of my wheelhouse, I'm basically on that part of the map that simply says, "Here be dragons." So for context, a while ago I made a video on the legend of John Boyd, a Korean War veteran, prominent member of the fighter plane mafia, and founding member of the club of Pentagon grifters that every year rope in the young and gullible into tales about how America bad because Iraq war, that the American soldier is up for sale at the benefit of whoever you don't happen to like at the time, blah blah blah, etc etc. You've probably met them. He claims the title of fighter ace in spite of never having seen combat nor claimed a single kill, and was whisked out of the Korean War, never having completed a full tour of duty, to study at the prestigious fighter plane school where he remained as a lecturer of the academics department, also known as not the department which teaches people how to fly. Though to be fair, he was apparently an instructor, and as the story goes, he was known as 40-second Boyd, for his ability to apparently beat anyone in 40 seconds. In a fight. A plane fight. A fight with planes. No, wait, sorry, I'm misreading this. Hang on a second. He bet he could beat them in 40 seconds in an air-to-air duel. I don't know if anyone took that bet, but apparently it was never claimed, according to another member of the fighter plane mafia writing for Code 1 magazine back in 1997. We'll get to Hillary on a different day. Regardless, when the Vietnam War rolled around, many of Boyd's ideas on how fighter planes should work were, quite frankly, outdated. Vietnam triggered one of the most significant military reforms in American aviation history. The book on pilot training was almost entirely rewritten, and as his fighter plane school began to be replaced with a new system, of which he was not invited to be part of, and as it became evident that his service in Vietnam was an honorary token position, not one of serious import, rather than face his own irrelevance, he fought back, his primary target being the new fighter plane program being developed at the time, which would eventually give birth to the F-15. Boyd proclaimed loudly that this new type of fighter jet would never work, and went so far as to try and delay the program multiple times, attempting to replace the design with one of his own. He was able to convince a number of people within the Pentagon, including former test pilots, that he was right, and eventually got himself a red flag operation where these new F-15 fighter planes were flown off against a number of F-5s, and proved to be so incredibly successful that the F-15s had to have almost quite quite literally, both arms tied behind their backs to give the F5s a chance. Unhappy with this, he took his fight to the media, creating a major controversy around the F-15 program, about how it couldn't dogfight, about how much it was costing, etc, etc, which almost got it cancelled. When the F-15 proved to be one of the greatest fighter planes of all time, Boyd reversed course and instead took credit for its creation, now saying it would have failed had it not been for his input. He did the same with the F-14 and the F-16, both designs he claims credit for in spite of being involved basically nowhere along the design phase. Now into this madness steps one William Bill Lind. As Boyd and the fighter plane Mafia grow in relevance in the press, Lind sees an opportunity. Now Lind, and I being ferociously more polite than this man deserves, is a racist. And when I say racist, I don't mean he voted for Trump or has controversial ideas on immigration. No, I mean he's a Holocaust denier. He is the main force behind the theory of cultural Marxism gaining prominence in today's society, and once wrote a book called Victoria, a novel of fourth generational war, in which a stand-in character for Lind, with big muscles of course, leads a group of Christian Marines against the forces of cultural Marxism while the US government collapses around them. That description does not do the book justice. It is insane. It starts with a woman giving a speech about the heroism of the Marines who perished at Iwo Jima, to which Fantasy Lind obviously takes offense because, well, no women died at Iwo Jima, and when he points this out, he gets forced to leave the Marines because wokeism. And this is the trigger for the book's main plot, which involves the protagonist jumping around doing very little other than just being there to occasionally give incredibly lukewarm and obvious advice. The day is won entirely through the enemy's own stupidity. It portrays the burning to death of an old woman as the right thing to do because she has the wrong opinion obviously, and includes a scene where African Americans are happy to return to their life as simple manual labourers. It is a showcase of how Lind, other than the mild dictatorial fantasies he has, in spite of being a proclaimed military tactician and selling a number of his own books on warfare and tactics, really doesn't know how a military works, doesn't seem to know what happens on a battlefield, what maneuver warfare is, or even what the Marines actually do. It is, to put it bluntly, trash fantasy. It's cringe, on the level of a Twilight fanfic.
This is a good man, and if you took the time to get to know him, you would find that out.
And if that wasn't enough, he is also a believer in the monarchy and thinks America should have its own royal family. But Lind has an objective. He believes the Jews, as well as all other non-Americans, are poisoning American culture, by which he means the purity of what he once described as the white race. His primary mission is, of course, to convince everyone else the superiority of the white race by whitewashing American history, by replacing the achievements of any non-whites or whites from second or third wave migrants in America with the achievements of what he calls pure-blooded Americans. In this quest, he found John Boyd, a pure-blooded American who claimed to be the designer of the big three American jets, the F-14, 15, and 16. This allowed him to whitewash out the achievements of Georgian immigrant Alexander Kartavelli, the designer of the P-47 Thunderbolt, as well as the F-84, a jet plane he worked on during the Second World War, as well as the Thunderstreak, the Thunder Chief, the XF-12, an unknown space plane which supposedly NASA refined into the space shuttle, though sources on that are limited, the XF-103, and the A-10. As one of the most important people behind the early development of the American fighter jet, Kartavelli told an almost perfect story of the American dream, one which could have encouraged people to believe that immigration, or maybe even just skilled migration, was a good thing. A story which compelled an idea that bringing the skill from other countries to America, where they have the resources to thrive, resulted in innovations that put America above the rest of the world, and instead replaced it with that of Boyd, a pure-blooded American who was brilliant because he was a pure-blooded American, dazzled with this idea of being this mad, inventive maverick, working behind the scenes and sticking it up to those fat-cat bureaucrats on the Hill, an almost pitch-perfect conservative working-class hero fantasy still believed by many people today. Essentially, Lind's objective is to convey the idea that the genius and power of America was built by pure-blooded Americans, and it is a result of the exceptionalism of that blood, and only that blood, and that immigrants are here to simply take advantage of it, not contribute. A line often held and repeated by people like Lind today. I made a two-part video on the A10 back when my channel had less than 1,000 subscribers, at a time when Pierre Spray, another prominent member of the fighter play Mafia, claimed it was his design, and all the public information on it, which largely quoted Boyd's own autobiography, seemed to reflect that. Since those videos went live, all mentions of Spray have been removed from the A10's Wikipedia page, and Cartavelli is finally getting the recognition he deserves, something I am quite proud to have having helped influence. However, when it comes to setting the record straight on Boyd, the matter of William Lind has remained. As he is still alive and has continued to remain within the public spotlight, he does have a large fanbase who will quickly rise to his defense, and I did promise my own subscriber base, probably rather stupidly, that I would make a video detailing my thoughts on cultural Marxism. So here we are. Yay. So what is cultural Marxism? Alright, let me put it like this. Okay, so imagine you are the Witchfinder General. It is your job to hunt down and kill witches, and you find some in this town. But this town has a problem. They quite like the idea of witches being around. Maybe one of them has cured a disease, or maybe they fund the local softball team, or maybe they made a really good pumpkin pie for the potluck. Well, you're not going to convince anyone in this town to set fire to their witches just by screaming at them and proclaiming witch. In fact, when you do, people start to get angry at you. See, they don't like the idea of a Witchfinder General around these parts, so they drum you out of town. But you can't give up. Witches are evil, and you can't just let them wander free. Anything could happen. So you somehow have to convince this town to give up their witches without them knowing it, and without them identifying you as the Witchfinder General. So you stride back into town with a fresh haircut and a funny mustache, and rather than scream witch, you instead tell everyone that you're not here looking for witches, good God, no! You're here looking for warlocks. Now the people are intrigued, they've never heard of a warlock. So you tell them that warlocks are people who have made deals with demons, exchanging their morality for power, that they bide their time in the shadows, doing occasional good deeds to throw people off the scent, all while positioning themselves in places of power so that they can corrupt and control everything from the inside. Which sounds very similar to the argument you made about witches, but no, this is not about witches, this is totally different. And then, when you've whipped everyone into a paranoid frenzy, you can point at whoever you like and scream, Warlock! And then you can burn your witches, plus anyone else who got in your way. They're witch sympathizers, they do not deserve mercy. You know that scene from Angels and Demons, the Tom Hanks movie, the one with the big, what is it, an antimatter explosion? Glossing over that. So there's a scene where Tom Hanks bursts into the room and sexy antagonist priest has been beat up and points at one of the other cardinals and screams, Illuminati! Because, I don't know, there's this whole plot by the Illuminati to kill the people who are next in line to be pope, and then it turns out that sexy priest basically made the whole thing up, creating this idea that the Illuminati are coming after the church so that he can point at whoever he likes, scream Illuminati, and have them killed, and then somehow become the next pope by jumping out of a helicopter at just the right time as an antimatter explosion goes off, of which 1 gram is the equivalent to the Hiroshima bomb. Not entirely confident you could parachute out of range of that, but whatever, it's a film. It's like that. Lind can't go around pointing at people and screaming, Jew! Because if he did, you would be like, well, this guy's a Nazi. And you'd throw things at him, as any respectable society should. So instead he screams, Cultural Marxist! Instead, because, yes, okay, the person he is pointing to might also be a Jew, but that's just a coincidence after all. Not everyone he points at is a Jew, because he's also going to point at anyone who gets in his way. People who try to stop him, etc, etc. He's not the Witchfinder General, of course not! That's just what the libtards call everything they don't like. You know, you really should be more open-minded. And that's essentially it. That's all cultural Marxism is. It's just a way for people like Lind to witch hunt the opponents of their political ideology, mostly Jews but not always, by disguising it as a larger problem under a different name and calling you the real Nazi for trying to stop him. It's neo-Nazism, with the serial numbers filed off. And that's all it is. Well, what, you want more? You want a more in-depth explanation? You've seen the runtime of this video, you know there's more.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, you're some dumbass YouTuber who's known for getting comedically drunk and ranting about history shit. And let's say, for the sake of argument, you're famous for going off on unrelated tangents that about half your audience understand, and the other half think you've just wasted their time with. You see where this is going. James Randi, aka The Amazing Randi, someone I consider a personal hero of mine, though he would not approve of me calling him such, a man famed for the work he did later in life investigating the paranormal, the quackery, the pseudoscience, and other things he often referred to as woo-woo mysticism, once gave a talk where he proved that Santa Claus is real. He's real because we cannot prove he is not. As to anyone who believes in Santa, no scientific evidence in the world can prove otherwise. Yes, you can follow the serial numbers on toys back to factories in China. Ha! Just a trick to fool the unfaithful. You can send scores of men and women and machines to scour the North Pole and find no evidence of any large-scale production facility manned by elves. Ha! It's invisible! You can set up cameras in every home and watch as parents sneak through at night and place presents under the tree with no evidence of any jolly fat man squeezing down a chimney. Ha! He knows about the cameras, and he's done all this just to trick you. But what about all the children in countries that don't celebrate Christmas? Ha! He only gives to the deserving who believe in their hearts. I didn't get a present from Santa. Ha! You're on the naughty list. Probably because of putting the cameras in everyone's house kind of thing. In other words, you cannot ever convince a conspiracy theorist that they are wrong. Regardless of what barriers you tear down, they will always just lift up the goalposts and run with them, finding deeper and deeper holes to crawl into and pointing out that the existence of any hole invalidates your so-called evidence. Santa Claus is magic, and your science cannot explain that. Of course, Santa's just an extreme example, and many people who believe in conspiracy theories when confronted by Santa theory will fail to connect the dots, believing that such an example is derogatory and thus does not apply to their way of thinking. So, cultural Marxism. Oh boy! For those of you who don't know, cultural Marxism is the belief that certain individuals, be these organized into radical or racial groups, or Illuminati-style mystery organizations, foreign governments, or even entire cultures, are attempting to subvert Western culture, and specifically American culture, and American values through the infiltration of the educational systems from the outside. The theory specifically deals with attempts to replace American culture and values with more Marxist or Marxist-leaning values, or values attributed to Marxism such as socialism, and this explains the current decline and eventual collapse of society as we know it. Although cultural Marxism has many branches, this is its core definition as described by people like Paul Gottfried and William Lind in a way that I've been able to extrapolate. If you believe in cultural Marxism and think I've gotten that definition wrong, then what you probably believe in is still cultural Marxism, just with a different coat of paint. You see, the biggest problem behind cultural Marxism is its definition has never really been clearly defined. Like many right-wingish conspiracy theories, the edges in which it can be defined are very loose, and when asked to define what it is, most people will give you a completely different answer or devolve into meaningless rambles and ask you to do your own research. William Lind, when talking on a podcast titled What is Cultural Marxism?, never once actually defined what it is, but spent most of his segment ranting about what Marxism is, again, without really defining it. This is because cultural Marxism is typically used as a recruitment tactic for the alt-right, and targets people on the centre-left, usually younger men falling down the anti-SJW rabbit hole, a rabbit hole in which you go from laughing at feminists online to spouting right-wing rhetoric, while still believing yourself to be centre-left. And the biggest problem is, one of the first things that rabbit hole does is condition these people into believing that the left labels everything it doesn't like as Nazi or racist. Therefore, when you tell them the foundations of cultural Marxism were a Nazi propaganda campaign against the Jews, influencing the pure ways of the Aryan race through architecture, lesbians, fruity drinks, jazz music, and modern art, they hand-wave you. You can tell them that the main proponents of cultural Marxism has always been mainly anti-Semitic racial supremacists, that it was once used as a recruitment tactic for the KKK, or that people like William Lind have campaigned for the introduction of severely racist policies, including the exclusive death penalty for any crimes in what he called urban areas. And they don't care. They look at you and say, "Why is everything racist to you? Is your argument so weak that you must resort to such extremes of examples? Do you honestly expect everyone to just freak out and bow down to you because you've said the word Nazi and now sit back smugly believing you've won the argument?" Of course not. Because cultural Marxism is so undefined, the bogeyman can become whoever you want it to be, personalized to the person you are trying to recruit. Blacks, gays, feminazis, political correctness, virtue signaling, social justice warriors, corrupt capitalist structures, Joe Biden, etc., etc. These are all products and weapons of a thought war created to subvert American values from the Frankfurt School of Thought, which spent its years under communist rule trying to find ways to turn capitalist countries into communist ones through philosophical study and ideas injected via teaching institutions targeting young people to create an aberrant culture war, or race war, depending on which branding you subscribe to, in order to destabilize America to prepare it for a communist or Marxist revolution, even though absolutely none of that is actually true. The Frankfurt School spent most of its time actually criticizing critical theory for being complete bullshit and praising Western values. And this comes from a time period where there was actually a huge cultural push from what we call the baby boomer generation against political correctness and what is often referred to as the whitewashing of history. And this came from the left, not from the right, as many of you have been led to believe. But this does not fit the narrative, and the idea that political correctness was once used as a tool by the right is ignored, and the anti-PC movement of the 70s is hand-waved away, with the memory of the movement being symbolized as dirty, stupid hippies who smoked weed and contributed nothing to society. That is the baby boomer generation, we are told, and those are the people who destroyed society. Even if the examples of historical whitewashing they fought against were things like the Trail of Tears or the desecration of India, things that were not typically taught in school and are still not particularly taught in school, and the conservative right tends to shy away from, or launch into the argument that such things are being used as justification for what they claim is an anti-nationalist white genocide, just so that these events can be hand-waved away again and never discussed properly. You're starting to see the pattern here. But this idea of some concentrated group of token enemy people trying to subvert American values through what might as well be sheer psychic hypnosis proves an excellent scapegoat to blame for a lot of America's problems and the problems it has faced throughout its history, and not, and this is the most important part, you. And this is what they are selling you. A world where the responsibilities of the world's evils have absolutely nothing to do with you. Nothing is your fault. Therefore, it's not your responsibility to change anything, because you are not the problem. You are not at fault. These people are, with their dyed hair and their angry, unreasonable attitudes. And aren't you glad you're on our side, where we wear shirts and speak in calm, reasonable tones? Aren't you glad you're on our side? Look at the cringe. Look at the feminists be cringe. This is the other side. Don't you feel smarter for not being on their side? Look at them. Keep looking. Keep looking. Just look and laugh at them. This is the other side. This is how stupid and cringe they are. Not like us. Not like you. You're a rational freethinker. You're on our side. You're smart. Not like these people. Now, let me tell you all about replacement theory and how stupid the left thinks we are, and by we, I mean you, and why all of this is really happening and the deep truth behind it all. And before you know it, you've gone from laughing at stupid people to spouting right-wing rhetorics, and yet most of you probably aren't even aware of the change. You spout the tired propaganda lines of the right and you fully believe them, but you still describe yourself as liberal. Sorry, libertarian. So when people talk about the alt-right, you think that does not include you. This is why, in the case against cultural Marxism, the history of it being largely a white supremacist anti-Jew Nazi movement is irrelevant. As I said earlier, any believer has already been conditioned to ignore any comparisons to the Nazis or racists, because that's what libtards call everything they don't like. So you can hand-wave it away and not have to think about it. They already know the Nazis stand among them, but they assume them to be in the minority, on the fringes of the more extremist sides of the movement, which you can ignore, because every movement has its extremists, including your own, and, well, we don't need to take responsibility for them. Are you going to take responsibility for everyone who loots during a Black Lives Matter protest? And we know if they did reveal themselves, they would be drummed out of the community, not given center stage and a microphone like yours. Please ignore all the examples which state otherwise. These people already know they are not Nazis, and having a belief that sounds somewhat similar to a Nazi one does not mean they agree with them on some of their more well-known beliefs. After all, third-degree murder and animal welfare rights were also Nazi beliefs, but believing in them does not make you a Nazi. You can't just tar everyone with the same brush, unless you're pro-Russian and talking about the Azov Legion, of course. Thus, in the rebranding of cultural Marxism as critical theory or postmodernism as a more modern movement, the Jews have been replaced with the globalists, or the Muslims, or in some cases, the EU, and their weapons are the libtards and whatever virtue signal they are supporting today. Cultural Marxism now means a white man cannot walk down the street and speak his mind without being attested by the pro-diversity mob. His freedoms, your freedoms, are being repressed in the name of progression. And if you found yourself agreeing with that sentence, congratulations, you are being manipulated by a neo-Nazi and have one foot in the door when it comes to joining them. Because sadly, that is a rhetoric that no amount of shouting Nazi is going to make go away. No amount of pointing out that the people telling you this are white supremacists is going to break, and no amount of screaming white privilege at a group of people who have never felt particularly privileged is going to stop. Because the history of cultural Marxism, the deep lore behind its movement, or the fact that it's used as a gateway to even more ridiculous right-wing conspiracy theories is all irrelevant to the common believer. They've already laughed when I told them they are being manipulated by neos because the concept to them is ridiculous. Regardless of how obvious it might be to anyone else, to them, it's a fantasy. The bottom line is that everybody knows something is going on at these universities, and now they finally have a label for it. That's all. It provides a simplistic explanation to a deeply complicated issue in a way which satisfies the curious mind, and it has nothing to do with Nazis or Jews or anything else, even if the Jew argument is slowly slotted back in, gradually, once you're ready for it. Once your mind has been opened up to this alternative political view that is being suppressed by the mainstream media, and you are ready for the deep truth. Because we are the oppressed underdogs. We know the real truth, and it's the mainstream media trying to keep us down, all owned and controlled by the insert institution of choice here, and surprise, surprise, all run by the insert boogeyman of choice here. To them, cultural Marxism has become James Randi's Santa Claus. No amount of arguing can prove it's not happening, and for each step you think you are taking forward with them, the goalposts are simply upped and moved to a new location. And this has been happening since the 1930s. And yet no one has been able to define exactly what cultural Marxism is or provide any evidence that it's happening. So how do you prove Santa Claus is not real? How do you disprove a negative? Well, if you'll allow me another small tangent, Terry Pratchett in his book The Science of Discworld writes,
"The draw a line philosophy offers a substantial political advantage to people with hidden agendas. The method for getting what you want is first to draw the line somewhere that nobody would object to, and then gradually move it to where you really want it, arguing continuously all the way. For example, having agreed that killing a child is murder, the line labeled murder is then slid back to the instant of conception. Having agreed that people should be allowed to read whichever newspaper they like, you end up supporting the right to put the recipe for nerve gas on the internet."
And this is theories like cultural Marxism or critical theory in a nutshell. Having agreed that things like affirmative action is a bad idea, and that some feminists are cringe, and that some universities increasingly care more about token virtue-signaling gestures to solicit more donations from liberal mothers who now suddenly care about minorities and their gay son, an innocent enough assumption, the line is slowly pulled further back to where those white supremacists in their suits with their reasonable-sounding arguments actually want it to be. Having agreed that Marxist values should not be taught at universities, the line is then pushed back. After all, we never defined what exactly is a Marxist value, so its definition can be stretched to mean pretty much anything. Nor did we specify exactly how this was being taught, or what methods were being employed to deceive and brainwash these students, so again, we can define it as pretty much anything we like. And thus the line is pushed to social justice classes, and then to gender studies, and then to LGBT history studies, and then to black history studies, to the civil rights movement, to history whitewashing, all the way back to, you guessed it, the Holocaust.
So I keep warning everyone that every one of the YouTubers that they like, that YouTuber's time on the chopping block will come, and today's was Black Pigeon Speaks' time. Because the problem isn't that you've done anything wrong, the problem is that you're making life difficult for left-wing activists by showing another side of the story.
Basically, at this point, a Nazi is anyone that disagrees with any aspect of the current World War II Foundation myth. The only real value, topic, or event that is held as sacrosanct and cannot be mocked, joked about, or even questioned on pain of imprisonment in many countries in Europe is the Holocaust. Throughout the Western world in its entirety, to question even the details of the Holocaust is to have yourself shunned by society and made a social pariah. Just ask Andrew Anglin over at the now defunct Daily Stormer.
All almost entirely unnoticed by its supporters, who will never see themselves as anything else other than a collective of rational freethinkers and truth-seekers going against the grain of the popular narrative as dictated by the lamestream media. They are not being manipulated. You are. They are discovering the truth on their own terms, or at least that's what they think, because, hey, I'm a smart guy. I'm smart enough to know if I was being manipulated, right? Until you start to think that the Nazis had a point, just the wrong demographic. And that's why, from the outside, the entire right wing or the libertarian movement seems almost confused as to what it actually supports, and seems to hold almost contradictory positions on almost any subject matter its supporters try to tackle. Of course, you telling them how stupid this belief is and how little evidence there is to support its actual existence yields limited results. Like Randy's Santa Claus, the conspiracy theorists just find another hole to dig into. Another video of a student holding a communist flag or wearing a beret with a star in it. Another feminist screaming in the street. Another cringe compilation of those damn libtards proves you wrong. Because one person in a million is enough to condemn through guilt by association, even if most of the videos are of the same people, taken out of context, or as the case for some of the more extreme ones, completely faked. Ah, says the reactionary, but it's not just 1 in a million, it's hundreds, thousands even. And I say, yes, that is true. I have seen those compilation clips, and by God, there is a lot of them. And that's a fine argument, until it's used by people claiming video games cause violence. And then they point to all the compilation videos of children getting angry at losing at video games. And by God, there's a lot of those. But we've all used bad faith arguments when it has suited us. We've all stood shoulder to shoulder with the extremists when it has politically suited us to do so. We've all listened to the words of a lecturer on the internet confirm everything we believe in smart-sounding quotes that we'll try to remember for later without ever checking to see if anything they said was correct. Like a teenager who's just finished watching a Christopher Hitchens video that has charged into a Christian web forum armed with quotes and facts and fully believing that the people he will be dealing with are all idiots who will be unable to deal with his clearly superior mind because he doesn't need to pray to the wish-granting sky wizard to know right from wrong. Because we all live in bubbles. Bubbles in which our exposure to the opposing side is typically very limited and often very naturally curated. A Christian whose only exposure to an atheist are those teenagers who regularly interrupt discussions and try to make him angry, may go his entire life believing atheists to be vulgar creatures full of hate, whose only purpose is to rob him of something he loves and takes great meaning in. And bad faith preachers will use this to their advantage and slowly pull that Christian down the rabbit hole where the latest buzzwords of the day are added to an increasingly and ever-changing list of things that are here to destroy Christian values and replace them with the teachings of the devil. A movement with similar anti-Semitic roots that has swapped out the Jews for barcodes, rock and roll music, tattoos, Dungeons and Dragons, and single mothers to its more modern targets: homosexuals, transgender people, furries, or having sex or children outside of wedlock. If these arguments sound familiar to you, that's because Cultural Marxism previously deemed it was Christian values and Christian freedoms under threat, not American ones. Up until about the mid-90s and early 2000s when the word atheist started showing up in statistics for young conservatives, and thus a rebrand was required. All to get butts and pews and the collection cup passing around, and the works of celebrity preachers on radio shows or books broadcast to the nation. Because like those Christians, both the right, and to a certain extent the left, live inside bubbles that compare the best of themselves to the worst of their opponents. Just as someone who believes in cultural Marxism's only exposure to the left is through feminist cringe compilations, the left's only exposure to them is Trump supporter cringe compilations. And by God, there's a lot of those. Like the Christian mentioned above, someone falling down that anti-SJW rabbit hole has only been exposed to the dark and cringy side of the left, to the idiotic preachers who charge in to destroy them with facts and logic, and have forgone any idea that their opponents might have facts and logic of their own, because clearly they are intelligent. They've thought long and hard about it and come to the obvious correct conclusion, and no further input is required. So anyone who disagrees must be stupid and not worth taking seriously. Does that train of thought sound familiar to anyone? And so the anti-SJW goes from laughing at feminist cringe to believing memes about how feminists, all feminists, are easily triggered, that the left is destroying its own argument with its behaviour, to gradually more bizarre and extreme notions like how the rise of gay culture has meant that many women now idolise feminine traits in men, which is why you, as an alpha male, are not getting any dates, to the plights of African Americans not attending university or getting good jobs, not because of racism, but because they come from broken families and live in a culture that idolizes crime and violence and calls anyone who breaks the stereotype and gets a good job as a race traitor. I mean, haven't you seen this rap video? And the best way to break this, in fact, the only way to break it, is when the two sides engage each other in civil discourse. Another one of my great personal heroes and someone I take great inspiration from is a man called Daryl Davis. Davis is a musician famous for, well, to quote himself, a boogie-woogie style of piano music, and he is damn good at it. But he is famous for another reason. In 1983, Davis was playing country and western music in an all-white bar in Maryland, and after the performance, he was approached by a man who said he had never heard a black band play like that before, and compared him to Jerry Lee Lewis. Davis ordered another drink and sat with the man and explained that Jerry had learned to play from listening and playing along to black blues music and the similar boogie-woogie style that Davis was famed for, that he and Jerry knew each other and had played together. Over drinks, the two would become friends, and the white unnamed patriot would eventually admit, perhaps a little drunk, that he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. But Davis was the first black man he'd ever actually sat down to have a conversation with, and was now starting to regret some of the things he believed. Which, yeah, it sounds like a "and then everybody clapped" story, but it led Davis to start writing a book on the Klan in which he would eventually interview Roger Kelly, the Grand High Dragon of the KKK. And over the course of the interview, Kelly and Davis would become good friends. Kelly invited Davis to be the godfather to his daughter, and Kelly would eventually leave the Klan behind. And when he did, he handed his robe over to Davis, who has kept it to this day. Davis would tour America, meeting white supremacists and various Klan members, befriending them and eventually turning them away from the Klan. To this day, he is credited with convincing over 200 people to leave the Klan behind. Now, how was he able to do this? How did a chubby piano player from Chicago convince 200 KKK members to turn their backs on the Klan? I mean, did he hypnotize them? Is he some sort of charismatic god? Were the Nazis right and the sound of jazz music can shatter the fragile mind of the Aryan and expose them to all sorts of un-Nazi ideas? Oh no, Lego! Not you too! No, you moron. He simply spoke to them. The people of the Klan had only been exposed to what they perceived to be the worst elements of African Americans. They'd seen them as vulgar, violent, stupid, and uncivilized, and held that against what they saw as the good and purity of the white man and his conservative family values. That to finally meet someone who did not fit that hole, who was so unlike the character they had been led to believe was a stereotype, it was for them an earth-shattering moment. And finally, these people who had lived in this bubble their entire lives were not dragged kicking and screaming with facts and logic and belittled and called racists, but encouraged to step outside that bubble by themselves, by engaging in civil discourse, by having an open discussion in which everything they believed was scrutinized but not belittled. They began to realize just how strange and often very stupid sounding the facts they based their views on were when there wasn't a chorus of people behind them applauding them for saying it. They became open to opposing opposing viewpoints and the experiences of others, which, more often than not, led to that tiny seed of doubt sprouting in their mind. If something they had known their entire life, that had been drilled into them as a child, was wrong, what else was wrong? And slowly they climbed out of that rabbit hole they had always assumed everyone else to be in. Because in the face of political extremes, doubt can be a powerful weapon. And this is why the preachers of either side, both the left and the right, hate open discussion. Darrow himself has been attacked numerous times by extremists on both the left and the right. Antifa consider him a white supremacist because in their ideology, in their rabbit hole bubble they wish you and everyone else to view the world as, they have no space for moderates, for the centrists. Because a moderate forces them to question what it is they're doing, and that makes them uncomfortable. Because anger is easy, anger is seductive and satisfying, especially when you feel it's justified. But if the crowd behind you start to suddenly become uneasy and slow down, then the extremists who are leading the pack become exposed, and it becomes much more easy for someone to question, what exactly are we doing here? Whereas if you have a crowd that's cheering you on, then it becomes easier to accept questionable logic as factual and shout down anyone who disagrees. So everyone just ends up riding the storm rather than trying to stand against it. Hence why when the left and the right do meet each other, the presentation of the opposing viewpoint is curated. The person who is chosen to represent that other side is typically considered more extreme in their viewpoints, easily triggered, and not particularly well versed on the arguments. So it becomes a public display as they get schooled by your chosen champion, and that way the notion that your side is the true, intelligent and moderate civilized side is solidified, and the opposing side remains preachy, angry, vulgar and often very stupid sounding. And when it's not, then that weakness of the extremist position starts to become a bit more obvious, and they start to look like idiots. So every precaution is taken to make sure that this never happens. Or have you never questioned why when they do conferences, always pick locations with high Antifa support, such as schools and universities in strong liberal areas, and make such a large showcase of the whole event? Because so long as Antifa show up, so long as their audience's only expose to the left is an angry, screaming crowd hidden behind face masks and threatening to burn the building down, their hate will be forever justified. So you could be forgiven for thinking that the opposing side, whatever side that may be, are pathetic, angry, and whiny, devoid of logic and living in a bubble of alternate news, unprepared for the facts and logic you've armed yourself as they stumble blindly into the Thunderdome that is you. Oh honey. Of course, humanity is far more complicated than either side will allow, and like that Terry Pratchett quote stated earlier, the simplistic view of the world preached by these people and the overly simplistic solutions they provide, heavily curated of course, do not consider the complexity or the uniqueness of the situation, proudly ignores alternate viewpoints, and returns to that original argument, that unobjectionable core draw the line when challenged. Killing a child is murder, that we can all agree, so slowly the line labelled murder is then slid back to the instance of conception, because if the world of suffering is so really black and white, then there must be an exact point in an embryo's lifespan where it is now a child, and why can that not be the second an egg is fertilized? And if you disagree, well then I guess you're in favour of child murder. This kind of argument works in the common mind, because if I'm completely honest with you, and this is the reason why I've never really wanted to get into it, this YouTube culture of political commentary, from the heavy hitters like Jordan Peterson to the Young Turks, down to Tim Pool and Sargon of Akkad, all the way down to every basic university gay flouncing around his apartment telling you his view, and every beer gut sunglasses boy in his truck giving you theirs. All the narratives, all the bullshit they peddle is not politics. It is the imitation of politics. It feels political, and it's highly moralistic, but all this bullshit does, all it ever did, is set up a nonsensical melodrama of good versus evil. It is a diversion that allows you to set up a justification for yourself while ignoring any discourse from your opponents. It reduces complicated subjects to virtue quests and moral crusades that makes you feel alive, like you're really part of something, like you're fighting the good fight. But at the conclusion of it all, you'll have found that you have just wasted your entire life failing to achieve a thing. After all, the anti-feminist crowd can proudly state with enthusiasm about how men are the true oppressed because they're more at risk from things like suicide. But when it comes to solving the problem of high male suicide rates, the brave, free-thinking, rational, intelligent heroes of the culture war are suddenly quiet. As Stephen Fry once said, one of the greatest failings of humanity is the preference to be right over the preference to be effective.
Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but you sat through it. How are you? You doing good? Anyway, before we move on, I want to clear something up, because people do this thing where they start whining at me for being a Democrat or a liberal or woke or, whatever the slur is this year. The reality is, I don't care. Politically, I've always described myself as a centrist, but if I'm honest, being a political centrist in these times is emotionally and physically exhausting. There are many, many causes that I care deeply about, and society has dictated that because I care, I must therefore stand firmly on a certain side, because we obviously have to pigeonhole each and every issue into left or right, because that way you can stop caring about things like dead children, so long as you can own that other side of politics that you don't like, or race to Twitter to defend your side from those hordes of mouth-breathing morons from the other side, because that's obviously the most important thing to do with your life. Like, there's this whole thing that the left and right really don't actually exist. Even this political compass, which has started to replace the whole left-right nonsense, is a complete oversimplification of the whole thing. It's why when you see rallies for, like, unite the left or unite the right, it's always very, very successful for the duration of the rally. And then they immediately go back to squabbling with each other and trying to put extra words in front of their names to indicate that, oh, I'm not like those other girls. I'm a neo-Marxist. What does that even mean? Well, it means you're an arsehole. Okay, that was obvious. Let's move on. This is why I say things like this culture of YouTube political commentary is not real politics. It's not really. Preventing trans people from changing their gender will not lower house prices. Cancelling Pride Month or forcing everyone to say Merry Christmas isn't going to lower the national debt. And I'm pretty confident letting Putin devour an entire Eastern European country and put its population to the sword just so he can move his drinks cabinet 5 inches closer to Berlin is not going to make eggs any cheaper. But these people don't exist to solve problems, they exist to make money. And you don't make money by solving problems. If you've ever wondered why they're all debate bros and why they keep trying to debate everyone, it's because so long as the argument keeps going, then it's always a controversy that needs discussion. If you even so much as think of providing a sensible solution or start discussing the deeper issues, they thump their chests, cry, "Debate me, bro!" and then it's no longer about the issue. It's about who looks best live on camera. It takes important matters, boils them down to a pantomime or a telenovela, and you tune in each and every day to get the latest horde of gossip. Who's in? Who's out? What new developments have happened? What new arguments have evolved? Who are we all rallying around tonight and hating today? It's a drama, it's excitement, but it's not reality. Real politics is not throwing a temper tantrum online into a ring light. That's performance. That's a show. I have more to say on that, but I'll come back to it a little later. Sorry, this whole video has become a way for me to air all my thoughts on politics at once. Just get it out of the way and done in one easily ignorable package. I promise we'll go back to tanks and naval warfare at some point. I know people say stupid things like, you should keep politics out of history and the military, but the thing is, that is such a brain-dead thing to say. Those two things are so intrinsically intertwined. You cannot be objective when you are discussing history. It is impossible. Anyone who claims that is lying to you. But that's a rant for a different day. But this is all probably why I've stopped caring about trying to defend my centrist position. Like, I don't know what a centrist is anymore, and the definitions that people tag that word with no longer accurately describe how I feel. So I now describe my political beliefs as ent.
I am on nobody's side because nobody is on my side.
because quite frankly I'm more of a humanist. I care more about what I think will most benefit humanity, regardless of which side that idea has come from. I prefer views in immigration and social programs that come from the left, while tending to side with the right over things like economic incentives and being tougher on crime. This does not fit into the typical idiot's point of view because they need to see the world as black and white, otherwise it becomes too complicated for them to understand. And when you exclusively make moralistic arguments, things like nuance tend to get in the way. So everything has to become an us versus them, a left versus right, a good versus evil. Your side believes in this, therefore you must also believe it. You, the other side, must start your argument by justifying those worst elements that you and your side represent. You can't come at me with ideas and how you're going to tackle the problem of dead children. You must first justify why Antifa riots and loots all the time. That's your side being violent. Checkmate, liberal. It's very easy to think like that. It requires almost no brain power because you don't need to think. You just need to have an argument. And when you don't agree and you say that those elements need to be stamped out and not encouraged or justified, it takes that argument away from them. And they get very upset because that is their favorite toy. You want to discuss the nuances of complicated issues and the difficulty of finding solutions to those issues that benefit everyone, and they just want to be angry and shout at you to prove that they're the good guy. The greatest evil in this world is righteous evil. The evil that does evil because it believes its actions are justified. Everything is allowed because the ends justify the means. It's far easier to see yourself as the good, virtuous, and everyone else as the stupid or dangerous, because then you never have to confront them as an issue, or is often harder to do, your own issues. In the perfect world that you envision, the problems are caused by them, and can only be solved when they don't exist. They've been carted off, or in prison, or buried in mass pits, or thrown out of helicopters, but either way, you don't have to deal with them and the problems that they cause. And you see how easy it is to suddenly start supporting mass graves, genocide, and concentration camps. But of course, it's only the other side that does those things, that believes in stuff like by any means necessary. That's why the left versus right politics is such a seductive trap to believe in. Things are much easier when it's them that's to blame.
It was much better to imagine men in some smoky room somewhere, made mad and cynical by privilege and power, plotting over brandy. You had to cling to this sort of image because if you didn't, you might have to face the fact that bad things happen because ordinary people, the kind who brushed the dog and told the children bedtime stories, were capable of then going out and doing horrible things to other ordinary people. It was so much easier to blame it on them. It was bleakly depressing to think that they were us. If it was them, then nothing was anyone's fault. If it was us, then what did that make me? After all, I'm one of us. I must be. I've certainly never thought of myself as one of them. No one ever thinks of themselves as one of them. We're always one of us. It's them that do the bad things.
You know what? You've been ever so good. Here, have a little mental health break.
Little pee-wee polka-dotted pig, polka-dotted and polka-spotted, tiny little pig, bit smaller than a figlet. Pee-wee polka-dotted pig, he'll hold your toothpicks. He likes to hold your toothpicks. Put him on the counter. Little spotted, tiny dotted, sweet little toothpick pig.
Feel better? Good. Now let's talk about...
The first verdicts in the police Operation Sanctuary. Let's go to Fiona Trott, who's covering that court case. Breaking news, Fiona.
In 2017, a large group of men are charged after a British police sting operation called Tendersea discovers a series of grooming gangs targeting young women in and around Huddersfield in England. These crimes are historic, with the first report stating as far back as 2001. 29 men are arrested, with 102 charges including child neglect, abuse, rape, and sex trafficking. These were horrific crimes that enraged the public when the story broke. Immediately, questions are asked as to why it took 16 years for the police to take action, despite the problem being known to local councils, social services, members of parliament, and even a local judge who received a letter from one of the abused girls detailing the crimes. There was even a televised documentary about it in, get this, 2004. As soon as the story breaks, inquiries into the handling of the operation start revealing major incompetencies in all levels of its handling. The truth of the matter was, everyone was aware of what was going on, but no one wanted to actually have to deal with it. Huddersfield Council didn't want the name of their town being dragged through the mud, and given the victims were almost entirely limited to girls from care homes, which cater to things like former drug addicts and the mentally disabled, no one cared. There is evidence social services were aware, but were too underfunded and overstretched. They simply didn't have the resources to do anything. Fingers start getting pointed. Now into this argument steps one man, one hero, one lone rider against the storm. You'll note the sarcasm in my voice here. One Tommy Robinson. Real name Stephen Yaxley, former leader of the English Defence League, a far-right ultra-nationalist group known for being anti-Islamic and exceptionally violent. Now Robinson notes something interesting. All the accused men are dark-skinned. During the trial, there's also an enforced media blackout which prevents the press reporting on the case in order to prevent any innocents swept up in the arrests from having their lives ruined. Because of this, Robinson claims the blackout is actually a cover-up to prevent offending the Muslims, and the police attempts to prevent him from reporting on this issue due to the blackout only adds fuel to the fire that he is being censored to prevent the truth from being known. Robinson then picks up on the previously mentioned 2004 documentary and discovers that the release of the documentary was delayed by police for several months over fears it would inflame race relations. This was only made worse when Andrew Norfolk, the reporter which originally broke the story in 2011, admits that police failures to act might have been that they were fearful of appearing to be racist. This allows Robinson and the various other right-wing organisations to heroically focus the narrative around race. And because of the media blackout, the public only receive this narrative. Now, rather interestingly, this narrative is supported by all those involved. Why? Because if the police say that they were fearful to act because they were scared of being accused of racism, then it's not their fault. It's no one's fault. Well, apart from society's, and society isn't going to lose their job because they let a child abuse ring go on for 16 years despite knowing about it. By focusing the issue entirely on race, it meant the blame could be shifted away from those responsible and onto cancel culture. But idiots on Twitter were never the issue, so the problem remains unsolved. The inquiry into it has been bounced back and forth from various departments. Huddersfield Council refused to take responsibility for it and tried to pass it on to the government, who immediately bounced it back to them. And for 22 years, this problem went entirely unsolved. The one thing that could have solved it, public outcry, was directed at entirely the wrong thing. The 29 men arrested were all British. Race was an issue, but it wasn't the problem. Huddersfield Council didn't want the reputation of their town being affected. There was also a lot of care homes in the area which generate a lot of employment and a lot of revenue, and fears might have been that if the story got out, then those care homes might move their businesses elsewhere. These girls were also poor, with many with no families and trapped in a broken care system that has for decades now suffered an increasing staff crisis due to low pay and poor conditions, leading to staff being underqualified and overstretched, with the authority built to keep it in check having no powers to investigate or prosecute. Genuinely, no one cared about these girls. But that didn't fit the narrative, so it was ignored. For years, their suffering was ignored, until finally, in 2023, a specialist task force was finally set up, and the following year, they had arrested 550 suspects and identified 4,000 victims. Tommy Robinson had the power to prevent that. He had this one opportunity to rally the public against the snobbery and incompetence of those involved and prevent any further victims from being abused. He instead chose to turn himself into a celebrity. The English Defence League believe that Muslims cannot fully be English, as those descended from the Islamic world can never be fully civilized to Western standards. To people like Robinson, this was the narrative they were trying to prove. Everything else was irrelevant. When a similar situation was uncovered in Scotland, it went almost entirely without any major press coverage, and I'll give you one guess as to why.
These are the faces of the heroin addicts who operated what was branded a monstrous child sex abuse ring in a drug den. The mugshots of people who laughed as their victims were repeatedly sexually abused after being plied with alcohol and cocaine.
The same reporter that broke the Huddersfield story also broke a similar story about the abuse of young men at many boarding schools in the UK, and was flooded with responses from various men sharing stories of the abuse they had received. This also got no attention. This is the allure of the alt-right. This is how they get you. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. They take complicated issues, boil them down to their most simplistic parts, and turn them into a morality crusade with clear lines of who the good and bad guys are. With you obviously being the good guys, and the bad guys being the minority who lack numbers or political power to fight back. Which makes everything far easier, especially to contextualize and think about. It makes you feel good about yourself when you can fire back at the obviously wrong side of history with any number of canned arguments that just seem to come to the mind so naturally. It's exciting, it's powerful, it's fulfilling, it's very, very satisfying, but again, it's not reality, and it does not fix the problem. In 2020, a man called George Floyd was killed while being restrained by police. This sparked a major protest around the world under the hashtag Black Lives Matter. But what should have been a decisive protest about police training and handling procedures lost its focus, because the conversation about police training is controversial. It's difficult to have, and many politicians rely on police unions for support. If they came out looking to restructure the police due to public protest, they would lose that support. So instead, the narrative was changed. The media focus became about statues, old TV shows with blackface, or people who said vaguely bad things back in the 70s, because that was easier to understand and less politically controversial. The focus was pulled away. Antifa was manipulated into tearing down statues, and the alt-right was in turn manipulated into defending said statues. Black Lives Matter became about something that wasn't important. Defund the police became the slogan, Blue Lives Matter became the return call, both equally arguing over something that didn't exist, because it was never about statues. It can be very comforting to be invested in something that's bigger than yourself. In many ways, it's almost like a religion, one that doesn't rely on such vague concepts like faith, because you've got facts and logic on your side. And that can make you feel a lot less alone in this world. But all it does is obscure the problem, the conversation we need to be having. By dragging you out to sea so far, the point is lost. Something not always, but mostly the right love to do, because it drowns out the original complicated argument and replaces it with a much simpler, emotional, moralistic crusade that is easier to argue against. And politicians love this kind of shit. Politicians have been using the culture war to distract you about what's important. There's nothing particularly malicious in their actions, it's just if you're too busy discussing dumb teenagers throwing soup onto paintings, then you're not talking about climate change. And it's far easier to throw dumb teenagers into prison than actually deal with the issue of climate change, because that requires a lot of work. There's no easy answer to it, and regardless of what you do, you're going to make enemies. But so long as you're never exposed to the true complexity of the situation, you don't have to think about it. If you never have to think, you never have to act. And if your rage is exclusively held online, then you can be ignored. And if what limited actions you do attempt is directed at token gestures, then you'll never affect anything, and no great effort is required to stop you. And every politician in the world will pander to that attitude because, well, it's easier kicking up a fuss about manspreading or pronouns whenever you're asked complicated questions. Thus the problem never needs to be addressed, and you get free political points from your side for doing it. You just say woke, and everyone applauds.
Everything woke turns to shit, okay? It's true. It's true.
Look at what's happening.
Hi, it's post-production Laserpig here. So I've cut this next part down a little because it was outrageously long and very... Vive la resistance! What followed from this point was another rant in which I covered a number of things. The representation of trans people and Trump supporters in modern society, how your perception of those people is curated, and generally how easy that is to do. Again, circling back to the do violence in video games cause violence in children, because your mum sees a lot of videos on Facebook. I mean, they are everywhere. My God! Because... just taking trans people as an example, there are about 1.6 million trans people in the US. So chances are there are going to be at least 100 of them who are going to be the kind that get up in your face and scream at you. So there's 100 potential videos right there. But you don't need to see 100 videos to have your, shall we say, opinion guided. You only need to maybe see 7. Because, let's be completely honest with each other. It only took one video of one person that one time, plus the actions of a very minor celebrity that you'd probably never heard of beforehand, to sow the seeds of anti-feminism, and then maybe 6 or 7 videos of feminist cringe to seal the deal. And that's a great example, because that condition came about because you were being manipulated. The entirety of Gamergate was a creation of 4chan. Which is embarrassing. The reason they got away with all that is because it's easier to think that everything really was about Arnita Sarkeesian bad than admit that you got manipulated by 4chan. It's 4chan. That site exists because back in the 90s, we needed somewhere to download anime porn. It's a loose connection of idiots online. It's not something you can say you lost to with any reasonable degree of dignity. So it's easier to stay in the dark, isn't it? It's easier to live in the reality where you think you would see through something like that. And actually the whole thing was a lot bigger than that. There was other things going on. So, but that's not true, is it? You didn't see through all that, did you? It's all going back to the whole James Randi thing, that the people who are easiest to fool are the people who already think they are smart enough to not be fooled. Now you take what 4chan did and amplify it, give it the production budget of a nation state and thousands of employees, and well, 6 or 7 videos is all it takes. Alright, it might not be enough to get you on board with the whole genocide plan, but it will help you internalize it if it does start to happen around you. It's not really anything to do with you, is it? And they kind of brought it on themselves, didn't they? The liberals destroy themselves with their own arguments. They flew too close to the sun, didn't they? That is the exact shit they used to say in Nazi Germany. They said the same in the Soviet Union, and they did it to the gays during the AIDS crisis. And they are currently doing it in Ukraine. There's a very famous poem about it. It's easier, I know, to see Trump supporters as racist Nazis, because then we can hand-wave them away and never have to deal with the complicated socioeconomic problems faced by families in rural America, and why these people feel abandoned by the state. Or the failure of the coffee shop liberal, what you might know as the liberal elite class suffering from Queen Victoria syndrome, so distanced from the working man that their struggles seem almost like comedy to them. It's fine to laugh at this idea that people not getting into university are blaming diversity targets for their own failings, but the uncomfortable reality is it does happen. In the same manner, it's easier to see Antifa as dumb students cosplaying as Marxists, rather than face up to the increasing problem of neo-Nazis within American society and their persistent attempts to worm their way into politics, to delete the human rights of minority groups, not only African Americans, but Latinos, gays, trans people, single mothers, divorcees, or just women in general, passing it off as attempts to preserve the Christian or American way of life, whipping you into a blood frenzy of paranoia so intense that you'll hand them supreme executive power without ever thinking about it. But you can't let those thoughts invade your mind, or the terrorists win. It's easier to see African Americans as criminal opportunists and maybe not quite as cultured or as civilized as the white blue-collar man and his family, and maybe brush them off on this idea that they just use racism as an excuse for all their failing, because you never have to deal with the reality that systemic racism is still very much alive in America. A lot of white people have faced discrimination, oh yes, but rarely due to their skin color, and never repeatedly due to their skin color. It's easier to see trans people as idiots led astray by the woke blue-haired liberal crowd, that it's all just some mental illness or fashion trend, rather than face up to the reality that it is not an illness, nor is it a trend. It's a condition with documented roots as far back as ancient Egypt, one that we have a cure for, and that cure is to simply allow them to transition, something they have been doing before it was even medically possible. Random example off the top of my head, James Barry, a surgeon who died in 1865 and was later found to be female at birth. They were doing this all quietly, all living without anyone really noticing or being disturbed by them, until suddenly their lives became the blasphemy of the day. And in doing so, by making them the enemy, by denying them this treatment, by pursuing them as something to be hunted down and removed like a cancerous tumor, suicides among trans people, especially teenagers, have skyrocketed. So maybe they don't feel like being quiet anymore. And I can respect that. But the thing is, you need that. You need an enemy. Cancel culture, feminazis, wokeism, the terrorists, whatever the buzzword is today, is a concept. And you cannot direct your anger at a concept. You need an enemy, a them, a living embodiment that you can actively fight, which is what keeps your attention focused away from things that matter. The 4chan hive mind cannot be defeated, but it can be distracted. And honestly, not with much effort. Hi, post-production Laserpick here. Turns out 4chan can be defeated. So, I guess I'm wrong. F's in chat for 4chan, I guess. The complexity of the world and its problems are often too much for the average mind, and therefore demand a simplistic answer. People are more likely to believe a well-told story or a marketing catchphrase than they are a several hundred-page, well-researched document by a revered college professor. A marketing catchphrase is something quick that grabs your attention, whereas a scientific document has a lot of words that you probably don't understand and requires time and effort to read. Time most of us don't have. Which is why so many of us have some YouTuber read it all for us. You also notice there's a bit of a pattern here, one where you can dismiss the suffering of those around you not affiliated with your specific group, be that race or gender or sexual orientation or whatever, because you know, oh, that's just what they all say. You may question where I'm going with this. At around the time the Clintons were making a bid on the White House, the left realized that the world was always slowly progressing away from traditional conservative values, which constantly have to update themselves in exactly what they are. Conservative values once favored slavery, child labor, laissez-faire, and were against the notion of things like public parks and wildlife conservation. That changed. It is the common will of the public who dictate morality and who things like traditional values are set, which can often change dramatically with each passing generation. Slavery and child labor are no longer considered traditional conservative values. Individual freedoms, human dignity, unless you're trans of course, and free markets now are, even if those were once considered hyper-left liberal values less than 40 years ago. But the left realized this would always happen without their input. Humanity was always progressing, and the conservatives were always forced to adopt the positions previously held by the left to remain relevant to the newer generation. They do this because, really, they don't care what they actually stand for. Their mantra is just that the left has gone too far, and we need to go back to the glory days of the past. The children yearn for the mines. So under the Clintons, the Liberal Party of the left moved away from the poor and working class it had always represented, and may still claim to represent, and instead went after the middle class, the working professional, the smart-looking, well-educated and young yuppie class, because they had more money and could donate more to campaigns. To them, the poor would always vote left because the other party was the party of the rich, and voting for them was suicide. So why bother appealing to people who had no choice but to vote for you? And so the liberals grew lazy, and slowly the needs of the poor grew less important to them, to the point where former President Obama, with rapturous applause, was able to make a well-meaning trade agreement with Mexico, which had the unintended side effect that led to many manufacturing companies uprooting factories in America and rebuilding them across the border in Mexico, where the pay was lower and there was less regulation, and thus more profit to be made. This left a considerable part of rural America unemployed and feeling rather abandoned, and it was in those people that Trump found his core support. People who felt abandoned by the system, because they had been. People who felt betrayed by America, because they had been. People whose suffering to the elites who ran the country was comedy.
They took our jobs! They took our jobs!
People who were willing to take a gamble in that first person who finally spoke their language and told them everything they wanted to hear because that gave them hope. And no amount of screaming racist at them was ever going to take that away. And yet, regardless of who is in power, for those who work for a living, nothing ever changes. To be a young person in today's world faced with the ever-increasing burden of student loans and of a system of which no amount of hard work will ever propel them into the ranks of the elite, it is a depressing time to be alive, and they are fully aware of this. The rich look down on the unfortunate as if poverty is a product of their own self-worth, that people who could not get into university have only themselves to blame, hence why so much emphasis was once placed on affirmative action. Because in its most simplistic form, which is the only form these morons understand, if African Americans cannot get into university because of racist barriers, then standards must be lowered for them. Because dealing with those barriers, systemic racism, is hard. Explaining systemic racism is hard. Lowering an entry grade is far, far easier, and much more effective in the short term, so that'll get you votes. But in reality, studies concluded that minorities, especially Hispanics that had gone to college and studied hard and achieved the grades and set out to find careers, were now worse off than those who hadn't. Those who had not gone to college and instead gone into construction or manufacturing or factory work or learned a trade. Simply because the rise in educated workers has not been met by a rise in demand for educated workers. And this is a problem that was not unique to minorities. But such things are complicated, so they are ignored. Instead, we are told that education is everything. The people in the good jobs are there because they studied and studied hard. They deserve to be there. The people who did not study, who goofed off in class and refused to hand in their homework in on time, now flip burgers at McDonald's or pick up cans on the side of the roads, because they don't deserve. Republicans and the right wing, of course, argue that this only proves their side of the argument, that the rich are rich because they deserve to be rich, either through education or through the sheer brilliance of being a self-made millionaire. Minorities, whether that be culture or upbringing or simple racial coding, are clearly not capable of achieving the same level, or they would have done it by now, and are therefore not deserving of things like a university place, and therefore much emphasis is placed on all the white people who deserve to go to university, but who could not because they were not diverse enough to fill the quota. But that is, of course, again, a simplistic way of looking at everything. It ignores the fact that racial groups, including whites, stick together, and thus minorities get overlooked for promotions or recruitments because they were not members of the exclusive country clubs or schools or even churches that dictate social standing to many of those in business. Or, even now, being aware of affirmative action, the qualifications of an African American are seen as less valuable than those of a white guy. But mostly because, well, minorities are simply not welcome in the safe spaces of the rich. They cannot network in the same way, and business is who you know, not what you know. And there are near limitless testimonies from people to evidence this, and if you don't believe me, try getting into IT without being a furry. But that is too complicated, and it doesn't really fit the narrative. The narrative apparently being that African Americans, members of the LGBT rainbow, and women are only capable of getting the good jobs through diversity hires, not through their own merit. They don't deserve, unlike you. So if there's a large population of those people at a certain job, it must be because of either favoritism or diversity hires. You'll note not logic that's extended to large groups of white guys because, of course, they're the majority, so it doesn't count. It is the exceptionalism of that blood, and only that blood. But getting back to the point, education is advertised as the answer to everything. Study hard, get good grades, and you too can be one of the proud professional elite is not reality. So a young person leaving college or university and entering the job market now finds that they are on average 70% worse off than their grandparents, who were not required to obtain such exotic degrees to earn paying jobs which afforded them cars and vacations and homes in suburbia. In fact, most of today's youth, even people as old as 40, today have worked 2 jobs to pay for rent and may never obtain their own home save through inheritance. And for those people, how do we solve such economic problems? Well, neither side has the answer. Both are too busy virtue signaling their own prospective voters, and all of them are made up of either elites who have been successful because of college and university degrees, or at least think they have, or think of themselves as some sort of self-made millionaire that looks down on the poor as if they just need to get a grip. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you too can do what I do. So many young people, when faced with the true horrors of reality, become overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of it all and fall into seductive traps, simplistic answers that promise to change everything and make the bad people go away. Are the police corrupt? Defund them. Capitalism corrupt? Become socialist. No money for social programs? Tax the rich. Too many homeless people? Welfare state will sort that out. In short, this what is going on at universities that people like William Lind and others like him like to whine about, and perhaps even the whole bullshit culture war itself, is nothing more than young people being seduced by something which offers a simplistic solution to whatever political boogeyman they are scared of, cheered on by grifters posing as great thinkers for money and power, reducing the solution to a catchphrase which can be shouted to a crowd via a megaphone, even if the process of simplification has made the answer ultimately wrong, even if defunding the police has proven to lead to rising crime rates, increased police corruption. Defund the police is easier to chant than introduce a harsher series of training regimens which focus on detectiving rather than physical performance, stop selling military equipment to police forces, introduce body cameras, and empower internal affairs to investigate small-town police departments where local sheriffs hire friends and encourage cultures where small crimes are covered up or pinned on the local scapegoat for the greater good. While you're at it, deprivatize prisons, create harsher sentences for repeat offenders, and pour funding into social programs so that people are less likely to turn to crime because of economic situations. And that is not unique to the left. Too many unemployed, lazy people dependent on welfare. Get rid of it. Not enough jobs, immigration is to blame. People distrust police, criminal hero worship culture. Sexism, women need to grow a backbone. Racism, political correctness gone mad. Too poor to afford healthcare, get a job. Job pays too low a wage? Well, I guess you should have studied at school harder. Or, to put it in terms the internet might understand, no money? Just buy less coffee! Politics is hard, not going to lie. The problems we face in our world are so deeply complicated and so enroached with corruption and patch-up jobs that some would take years to understand and decades to fix. The solutions to some problems in themselves require complicated plans that will always be criticized and might not ever work because they were so heavily criticized. And even if they do work, by the time society starts to feel its positive effects, so much time may have passed that someone else is now in charge, and they get to take the credit. And this happens all the time. And politicians will do whatever they can to avoid it. Because most of them just want a legacy. They want their name in the history books, and others are too wrapped up in playing the game of politics that making sure your opponent's solutions fail and coming up with excuses as to your own failings and shifting the blame around and generally being unhelpful is more important than anything else. The entire stupid culture war, which has been going on for generations, not just since Gamergate, is a product of lazy-ass politicians and people thinking they understand the world a lot more than they actually do, combined with a culture of grifters on the internet selling you the idea that society is broken, but that it's other people's fault. It's them that's to blame, not you, not us. Because if it's them that's to blame, then nothing is anyone's fault. So you don't have to do anything. Apart from be angry. Life is complicated, and the problems the world face are extremely complicated, and there is no easy solution to it all. So, by kicking up a fuss about wokeism or pronouns or women in video games, the original argument is drowned out, and the complicated problem never needs to be addressed. And this will carry on until we are all dead. Because it works. Because I guarantee you, half of you watching this video now were all aware of this already. But all of you, now knowing you are being manipulated by lazy governments, corporate marketing departments, and whatever else, will continue to do absolutely nothing. Like I said, I'm very viva la resistance right now. Have another mental health break. Feel better? Good. Now let's talk about the... So I want to return to that draw the line Terry Pratchett quote just one last time. I said that the right draw people in with reasonable sounding arguments, things no one could really object to, and draw the line there, painting everyone who speaks against them as clearly being on the other side of the argument and thus in favour of this clearly horrible thing, before slowly pushing that line back to where they actually want it. In many ways, this is why a lot of people hate centrists, because returning to the centre ground is often used as a cover by right-wingish grifters to try and shift the argument back to where they drew that reasonable sounding line. I'm going to end up repeating myself several times here. This is just to make sure you understand, because this is important, and I am a bit of a scatterbrain, you know. If I've been coherent at all in this video, it will be something of a miracle. So, to give you an example, the line is drawn at free speech. You are for free speech, in which case you're on our side. If you're not on our side, you're against free speech.
You're not with us, you're against us.
So obviously you're on our side, you know, because you believe in free speech. Now you don't have to fully be on our side, that's fine. You just need to know that the people over there, on the other side, those are the dangerous people, because they want to rob you of your free speech. But of course you've fallen for the trap, because what exactly is free speech? What does that actually mean? Or to put it better, what do I mean when I say free speech? Right-wingers in the UK protest the country has no free speech because you can be arrested for physically threatening someone, even if that threat is posted online, a law they frequently describe as draconian. Elon Musk even threatened to invade the UK over it, even though they were the ones who demanded its implementation because, you know, we need to educate the liberals that they just can't threaten people online and expect to get away with it. Right, Carl? Tommy Robinson mentioned earlier has been using this as a mantra for years, claiming he has been arrested multiple times in violation of his free speech. In reality, he has been arrested for aggravated assault when he kicked someone in the head multiple times as they lay bleeding on the ground, leading a riot, using a false passport to enter the United States illegally, mortgage fraud, stalking. Oh, and he almost ruined the entire case against the Huddersfield Ring, which would have let them go free on a technicality had the police not intervened. What a guy. Again, I ask, what is free speech? Well, the line labelled free speech can be interpreted to mean pretty much anything. Maybe to you it means being able to criticise the government without consequence. To someone else it means being able to speak their mind without repercussions. To others it means they shouldn't get banned from internet forums. To some others it means being able to shut down religious intolerance and preach the word of God in schools. So long as it's the right God, of course. The line labelled free speech can be pushed back, gradually broadening what free speech actually means to include whatever they need it to at the time. All the way back it goes to the point where it's pointed out that in this tolerant society where any man should be able to speak his mind, the one thing you can never say is Holocaust denial. But you, being in favour of free speech, you might not agree with Holocaust denial, certainly not, but you'll fight for the right for someone to state their opinion without being arrested, right? I disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, the line famously misattributed to Voltaire. You should have the freedom to choose what you believe in, and if you don't believe in the Holocaust, then that is your right, and no one else's business. And if that right is denied, if the politicians get the power to dictate what you can and cannot believe in, then sir, it's just a slippery slope. And now you're starting to see where that line ends. And where does it end? If you said the Jews, then... This is probably a very predictable argument, and any right-wing person watching this, assuming they still are, have probably rolled their eyes and gone, of course. Because as I said earlier, the idea that neo-Nazis are manipulating them is an argument that belongs in the realms of fantasy. It's ridiculous, the result of stupid libtards trying to connect everything back to the Nazis because everyone has a World War II fetish and nations base their cultural identity on it. So much so that you have probably been conditioned to immediately switch off any time the comparison is made. But in reality, this is that other side of that cultural Marxism or critical theory argument. It's not just a gateway to the dark side, to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. But it's also used as a Trojan horse for, you guessed it, the Jewish question. For those of you who don't know, the Jewish question or the Jewish problem is another conspiracy theory based on the idea that the Jews, that is the entire race of people, are using the Holocaust and other tragedies which have befallen them as a people as justification for a victimization complex to push hyper-progressive ideologies and suppress any nationalist ideologies by drawing a comparison to Nazi Germany. By opening up your mind to the idea that the left are doing this with references to colonialism and slavery, etc., and that there's some secret foreign cabal behind everything, but not that one, no, that one's definitely not true, and that this is what is happening to all these universities and why everyone has all these weird ideas all of a sudden, it allows those extremists to place that tiny seed in your mind about just who this cabal is. The philosophers of the Marx school of thought might not all be Jews when you're first learning about them, but by the time you are this far down the rabbit hole, they will be. Or they will be funded by the Jews, and the line between Jew and Marx will be drawn, and you'll be reminded about just who funded all those Marxist-led genocides in Russia. The actions of the State of Israel will be applied to the entire Jewish race as a whole, and then you'll be posed the question, what else are they funding with all that money and power they have? You've already been conditioned to believe the left labels everything it doesn't like as Nazi. You automatically dismiss any references of comparisons to the Nazis in any argument. As soon as the comparison is drawn, then the other guy has clearly lost the argument, and you can sit back smugly disregarding anything they're about to say. By saying it's American values under threat, and showing up to rallies with American flags and singing patriotic songs, it allows the neo-Nazis to constantly hide behind the banner of national pride, something they've been doing since the 1930s. If you've ever seen the film Night in the Garden, which I showed clips of earlier, it shows what appears to be a typical Nazi rally in a theatre. People holding Romanesque-style flagpoles, children dressed up in military uniforms, until the camera shows a wide shot and you can see what it is they are all looking at and saluting is a giant picture of George Washington, with swastikas embellished of the American flag. The speaker stands up and proclaims that the Jewish-controlled media is demonizing him, so everything you think you've heard about him is wrong. He is in favor of America for the Americans, protecting American families and American values against foreign cabals who threaten that. Does that sound familiar? Everyone knows the world around them is complicated and strange, but they carry on regardless. The thousand shades of grey between pure evil and good that wrap around almost every situation in the world are too complicated to think about. It's depressing and emits a sense of almost sheer hopelessness in the mind of anyone who thinks about it too hard. There is instead comfort in normality. I am in my lane, I am unbothered, I am moisturized, I am focusing, and I am flourishing. If you wish to excel in life, you must concentrate on the things that are important to you. Your job, your career, your family. For Americans, this was always reduced to three simple paragons: God, country, family, in that order. I've gone over that in a different video, so I won't super explain it here. Your worldview shrinks as you get older. Your world becomes your home, your career, your children, and you don't often dictate much thought to the goings-on of the world outside those things. So long as none of these things in your world are threatened, you are content to ignore everything else, even if you know it to be wrong. You are living in hyper-normalism. And when you live that kind of life, as the majority of everyone on the planet does, you don't have time for the sheer complexities of every situation as it presents itself around the world. You want something to tell you about it in the most simplistic and quickest way possible, so you can get on with your life and the things that are important to you. You need that complicated situation reduced to a simple narrative, which gives an incredible amount of power to anyone who can do just that. Thus, you return to the grade school. Everything becomes a narrative, a moralistic battle between good and evil. This is our side, that is their side, this is the line. The complexities of the universe have been simplified for you, reduced to a headline and a series of talking points to repeat around the water cooler. So if you want Americans to sit up and pay attention, you need to tell them that one of those paragons, or all of them, is under threat. The average American isn't going to care about trans kids or pride months or abortion clinics because typically it doesn't affect them. So it becomes the war on Christmas, the war against Christianity. Christian values are under threat, American values and the American way of life is under threat, or the traditional family and family values are under threat, without of course ever truly defining what those things are. are, just reminding you that the other side wants to take it all away from you, and you don't agree with that, do you? So you jump aboard, shaking hands with a group of people you'll only ever see as just a social group of guys who have concerns about free speech and how the liberals seem to be taking it all too far. They're not Nazis, that's just what the libtards call them because they're stupid. And when you've accepted that, they can push that line back to where they really want it to be. What do family values mean? Well, it means keeping the moral values of the family alive, which, though vague, might just mean children should respect the wisdom of their parents. It might also mean no abortions or sex before marriage. Tomorrow they're talking about the sanctity of marriage, which might mean gay people shouldn't be allowed to marry or have children or really exist in any way, shape or form, or it might be that they want to ban porn. Tomorrow it's all about the traditional and sound functioning of the family unit, which is vital to the very fabric of society, which means women belong in the kitchen and must be subservient to their man, or they want to ban divorce to save the children, or a combination of all of those things. This is not a slippery slope. This is genuinely what some people believe and are actively fighting for, using the term family values as a camouflage for their true intent. And you might say, but I didn't sign up for that. No, but you did. As I stated earlier, they simply made a vague statement and did not define exactly what they meant by it. Your brain did the defining, probably without you realizing. It's the oldest political trick in the book. The line is first drawn where you assumed it should reasonably be, and then moved later when you weren't paying attention, or when you reach a point where you can be easily convinced that that's where the line really should be. Politicians do this shit all the time. Even if they don't get that line all the way back to where they want it, they are happy to sit back and take their time with you, pushing you one step forward at a time in what is often referred to as salami tactics, a political tactic where a big change is introduced gradually by means of lots of little changes or slices introduced over a longer period of time, implemented in such a way that people would not really notice the smaller changes until it was too late. The frog jumps out of the boiling pot, but will sit there and boil alive if you slowly turn up the temperature. A tactic that was also used by the Nazis, summed up in the poem by Martin Niemeyer, First They Came. I mentioned it earlier. A poem which describes how the Nazi authority began purging minority groups, starting with the ones people would care least about, in which the author admits letting it happen and not caring because he's not a member of these groups until eventually they come for him, and there was no one left to speak for him. This was later used as the basis for the anti-fascist American propaganda film called Don't Be a Sucker, in which a fascist preacher on the streets calls for the purging of certain minority groups in order to protect the sanctity of the American state. The protagonist nods along, agreeing with the statement as the preacher reads out a list of these groups until the protagonist's group is mentioned, and suddenly he takes offense.
I'm speaking to you as an American, and I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what? Without Negroes. Without alien foreigners, without Catholics, without Freemasons. You know these people.
What's wrong with the Masons? I'm a Mason. Hey, that fella's talking about me.
And that makes a difference, doesn't it?
These are your enemies.
Or, to put it all in internet terms, I didn't think the leopards would eat my face. In fact, if you want a better example, I've already done this to you. Earlier in this video, I was talking about how the roots of cultural Marxism was originally a propaganda campaign by the Nazis to lay the blame of modern society's problems on the Jews, and then gave a list of things the Nazis rallied against during this campaign, one of them being modern art. And then I flashed up a picture of The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Now, many of you, upon seeing this, probably immediately started screaming in the comments, "That's not modern art! Modern art means abstract stuff like this, or that painting that was just a dot, or that thing that won the Turner Prize, it was just a light bulb flicking on and off." No, when the Nazis said modern art, they meant stuff like this, which included things like Van Gogh, Henri Matisse, Adolphe Den, and Picasso. Most specifically, Guernica, which portrayed through Picasso's eyes the horrors of the Spanish Civil War. You could maybe think of why the Nazis wouldn't want war portrayed in that particular way. I didn't define to you what modern art is. You just assumed it was those stupid things you'd heard about, like that car with the giant doily over it, or that cow split in half. So when I said I'm going to the Louvre to burn all that horrible modern art, you automatically assumed that means the stuff specifically that you don't like. And by the time you're reading about how I've burned the Scream, it's it's too late. Because once you're on board holding all those salami slices, once you've accepted them as baseline normal, it becomes easier to open your mind to more interesting things like the Great Replacement theory, about how all this is a plot by foreign cultures like Islam or China, but definitely not Russia, to replace all the native white people with their own, taking over a country from the inside. And so you become distrusting of non-whites and angry when you hear about how entire parts of certain cities, usually ones you've never been to, Birmingham in the UK is the often cited example, being totally under the control of black people or Muslims who have their own pseudo-government and follow their own laws, of which the police are powerless to prevent. Not because they can't, but because they'll be labelled racist if they do. We went over that earlier. Ignoring, of course, that people of the same culture tend to find each other and stick together, not because of conspiracy, but because it's either comfortable to be around people who speak the same language as you, have the same culture as you, understand you, and can help you out in this new unfamiliar environment, or power circles within the government, law enforcement, or general society has forced them to do so. This is not exclusive to minority groups. White people do this as well. Just look at parts of Spain where entire city districts and regions have been completely taken over by English expatriates, many of whom live in exclusively English-speaking zones, rarely leave, do not speak Spanish, and have argued in the past that such regions should be subject to English law, not Spanish law. Does that idea fill you with the same hatred and fear as the Birmingham example? And if it doesn't, what does this tell us about you? Isn't the idea that one race of people being allowed to do a thing the other can't the very definition of racism? Well, this doesn't fit the narrative, so Birmingham becomes the example and Benidorm is ignored. Once your mind has been opened to racist concepts, once you start twitching when a minority family moves into the neighbourhood, once you start sitting in your truck with your shades on ranting about how them libs need to grow a pair because your daddy worked 16 hours a day for no thank you, once you get involved in all those online discussions with other freethinkers who don't listen to no mainstream media, not that I'm defending the mainstream media, you understand I run sponsors for Ground News for fuck's sake, then you slowly start to put it all together. If you accept there is a secret underground cabal emitting from wherever that is undermining American values to take over the country from the inside, that the liberals are dumb and this is why they keep falling for it and refuse to listen to reason because all they do is shout Nazi at you, once you've been opened up to the idea that the right stands for traditional American values that you grew up on and the other side cares more about celebrating diversity for the sake of diversity and puts down your culture because it's the culture of white people and white people are inherently racist, then what you've probably figured out is that this is all a group of people using discrimination as a justification for their own victim complex to push hyper-progressive ideologies and suppress the traditional patriotic mindset by comparing it to the Nazis, which if you haven't worked out by now, I'll spell it out for you. That is the Jewish question. It is the Jewish question without the Jews. And all someone needs to do is lean into you and ask, so who do you think funds all this? Who has all the money? Who owns all the banks that all the major countries are in debt to? And hey presto. Because if someone rants to you about the Jews, your mind will instantly go to, well, Nazi, and you back away slowly, so you have to come to that conclusion by yourself, unaware that you are being manipulated into making that exact conclusion. When you finally do, you pat yourself on the back for working it all out because hey, you're the smart one, and congratulations, you've become a neo-Nazi. All without realizing it. Because this is how neo-Nazis work. If you're meeting a neo for the first time, they typically won't sit there and immediately start ranting about the Jews. They won't throw their arms up and salute and shout Nazi slogans unless they're gathered in a large group and showing off. Instead, they will not talk about the Nazis at all. They will instead talk about, the evils of the Western world, the power of the House of Windsor or the federal government, America's war crimes, the true horrors of the British Empire, the sheer lunacy of Sharia law, and the brutal, violent history of Africa prior to colonization, before the white man arrived. They'll talk about Dresden, about the Jewish involvement in the slave trade, about the war crimes of Churchill, and so on and so forth. The objective is not to make the Nazis sound good, but to make everyone else sound either as or more evil by comparison, and make themselves appear as the oppressed underdog fighting the good fight, all the while masquerading their attempts at implementing Nazi ideologies into the US government by dressing them up as attempts to save American American culture, American children or families, or Christian ideology, disconnecting the word Nazi from the end goals of Nazi ideology by filing the serial numbers off. Once that line has been drawn, once that conclusion has been made, the rest is just a matter of making sure you understand any counter-arguments as propaganda, reject the more common works by noted experts in their field by reducing their arguments to the most simplistic narrative and hand-waving it away as that's what they want you to believe, and allowing the works of anyone who dares question the societal core beliefs as real history. Welcome to your new life as a Timmy. Which begs the question, are they right? Are the Jews secretly in control of the world? And are the people who propagate this question correct? Are they correct about the religious cabals, about the deep states and the Illuminati, all combining forces to specifically keep down the power of the white man? Are they right that the blood of the pure Aryan has some special properties unknown to science which makes them genetically and mentally superior to the rest of the world, and who would be capable of obtaining idealized utopian societies if given free rein, all held down by the unwashed, unclean races of the world jealous of their power? Or are you being lied to? The thing is, we now need to flip the script a little here, because nuance is now something you need to ignore. This is why you should never have a defined side or a philosophy that you apply to everything unilaterally, because every now and again you find a platypus, something that doesn't fit your pigeonhole view of the world, leaving you open to constant criticism from people that scream because that platypus is there, then you must be wrong about everything. In this instance, the nuance, or rather the people propagating the nuance, are trying to distract you from answering that question, because obviously you're not being lied to. Absolutely not. No. The question is wrong. And you might well go along with that, because if you never have to acknowledge that question, you never have to answer it. It's much easier to live in the reality where you never answered the question than the one where you did. It's easier to retreat into the safety and comfort of the darkness than embrace madness. So, we should probably talk about Putin, right? Early in September of 2024, two Russian nationals with ties to Russia's state-funded media corporation Russia Today were indicted by the Department of Justice for an attempt to use American influencer agencies in order to push Kremlin narratives, or to put it bluntly, Russian propaganda, on YouTube. Russia supposedly kept a list of 2,500 influencers on payroll. Now, while this investigation is still ongoing, what has been proven is that there was indeed a network of right-wing, alt-right, and far-right influencers who were all being paid by Russia to spread Russian-influenced narratives in order to disrupt the American way of life and make the country more susceptible to foreign influence. Now, that might seem ridiculous in concept. I mean, how could influencing a group of people typically dominated by young involuntary celibates who spend most of their entire lives being angry online allow the United States of America to be controlled by Russia? I mean, corrupting the minds of the youth through media to make the country more susceptible to a foreign-backed revolution? What a ridiculous notion. While the full list of those involved remains largely unknown, the most high-profile name to be leaked was Tenet Media, who we were told were allegedly fully aware that they were being paid by Russia to spread these narratives, and took great effort to conceal this by creating a fake pseudonym of wealthy EU nationalist Edward Gagarin to funnel funds through. Tenet Media employed a number of right-wing commentators, including serial plagiarist Benny Johnson, the chief creative officer at Turning Point USA, host of the Rubin Report, Dave Rubin, whose YouTube channel has over 2 million subscribers, yes, I'm jealous, and a famous middle-class centrist millionaire, Tim Pool. The word centrist, of course, being in massive quotation marks for a reason. All three have claimed they were unwilling victims in the scheme and were unaware that they were being paid to distribute Russian propaganda. Tim Pool was allegedly paid $100,000 a week to produce content. Yes, I'm jealous. One of the videos in which he states proudly that Ukraine is our enemy.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine.
If Tim Pool was unaware he was being paid to distribute Russian propaganda, then either he is lying or he is painfully stupid, and I'm not really sure which one it could be. Okay, I know it's bad form to use the whole evil or ignorant argument, but in this case, what's the alternative? Actually, there is an alternative. There is a third alternative here. I think he's actually really smart. You see, a lot of millionaires always say, if you want to be one, you cannot afford to have morals. Morality, as it turns out, is expensive. So Tim Pool walked away with, allegedly, $65 million in revenue. Yes, I'm jealous. He probably was aware he was being paid to spread Russian propaganda, or at least was suspicious that this was likely the case, but he just didn't care. Because to people like Tim Pool, like the mainstream media they pose as an alternative to, for the right amount of money, they will tell you absolutely anything.
I hope you enjoy a few pints with the lads tonight. Up the rah!
And that's the biggest difference between people like him and people like me. I mean, I get called a propagandist all the time, a pro-Ukrainian propagandist, but I don't get to be a millionaire. I don't get to wear designer clothes and drive a Lexus and live in a compound with all my buddies and their guns. Okay, you know what? Cards on the table, full transparency. This is what being a Ukrainian propagandist has earned me, okay? My support for Ukraine has netted me a grand total loss of 60,000 Great British pounds. That is nearly $80,000 US. And if you add lost sales from merchandise, because all that profit goes to various Ukrainian charities, plus the lost ad revenue because YouTube demonetizes me every time I mention Ukraine, plus all the lost money fighting bogus copyright claims from Z-bots, of which I get about one a month, plus all the sponsorship money I've turned down from a certain online wargame that we won't mention, then you could quite easily triple that. And for that, the little free gifts, the little perks that I have received were a t-shirt from U24, a few patches from NAFO, and a couple of people in Ukraine bought me a beer. I could have said nothing. I could have never have supported Ukraine and bought a house. Instead, almost all the revenue my channel has made over its lifetime has gone into funding Christmas presents for war orphans, this bus for disabled children, replacement vehicles for aid workers, armoured vehicles for Ukrainian infantry, drones, bombers, anti-drone guns. I helped fund medical supplies, a mobile hospital, water purifiers. I brought drinks for tank crews. I bought replacement navigation equipment for a helicopter division. I helped fund ambulances. I helped fund the rebuilding of this hospital. I funded trench candles, food packages, warm clothes for people who had been left homeless over winter because their houses had been destroyed, and probably like a million other things that I've just lost track of. What I've done might be significant to me, but it is absolutely nothing compared to what so many so-called Ukrainian propagandists have done, risking life and limb to just do what they feel is right, a sacrifice they were never asked to make. You do not make money being a supporter for Ukraine, but you do being one for Russia. And that's the thing, if I was really in this for the money, I'd support Russia. And don't think they haven't tried to recruit me. They have. I wasn't offered Tim Pool kind of money, and yes, I'm jealous, but I was offered 10 grand a month, but just the chance. Honestly, just the chance to have the daily harassment, the death threats against me and my family, the constant, never-ending screaming. Just stop. I won't say it wasn't tempting, but that's the difference between me and Tim Pool. My morals aren't for sale, but he has never gone to Ukraine. He has never been faced with the reality of what happens when you support Russia and when you tell people that Ukrainians are our enemies. I have, and that changes a man. The reality is, all of the people in the right-wingosphere pose themselves as the good alternatives to the bias of the mainstream media, but all of them were happily prepared to do exactly what they were accusing the mainstream media of doing. For the right amount of money, they will tell you whatever anyone wants, so long as it's not something that they think you don't want to hear, out of fear that you might stop paying attention to them. Exactly like the mainstream media does. The difference being the mainstream media has regulations on what it can and cannot say. They can exaggerate, they can create half-truths, they can shape narratives, but they cannot knowingly lie to you. And all of their sponsors, all their owners, anyone pulling the strings behind the scenes is all public information that for a $30 a year subscription to a service like Ground News, you can see it all on your phone. YouTubers and people who operate more independently like Tim Pool and people like Alex Jones don't have that kind of regulation. They don't have to tell you who is paying them to say what. They don't have to tell you the truth. And their opinions and their morals are for sale to the highest bidder. This is why when Russia sought to influence public opinion in the West, they went to these people, not to the mainstream media, because they could be bought, and it could all be kept quiet. And if Putin wanted to throw them some money to suggest to their audience that the Crocus City Hall attack was all the work of Ukrainian terrorists, or that the Azov Legion were all Nazis, or that Donald Trump was the only hope America had, then so be it. What was it to them? Like it or leave it, these are the same people who put into power a president who in his first 100 days has had a special member of his government perform a Nazi salute twice, cut funding to Ukraine, cut intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which Russia immediately took full advantage of, unleashing one of the largest drones attack across the entire front, which targeted vital sectors of Ukraine's energy infrastructure with suspiciously greater accuracy than it had previously, including at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, whose gigantic sarcophagus that currently prevents a shitload of radiation from leaking all over Europe caught fire. He also revoked the security clearances of 51 intelligence officials who had been working against Russian disinformation, put into power a director of the FBI who is suspected of having links to Russian officials, had a temper tantrum live on air, has threatened to pull out of NATO, isolated America from its military allies, redeployed thousands of troops away from positions where it could combat global threats, imposed sanctions on almost the entire world, including an uninhabited island, except Russia, almost crashed the economy, gotten rid of one of the greatest weapons in the fight against global terror, and whose special person made one of their first actions to fire half of the people manning America's nuclear weapons stockpile. Hi, post-production Laserbig here again. So you remember Doge, Elon's little pet project for the Department of Government Efficiency? Yeah, they're all compromised. Doge demanded full access to a lot of government systems. In fact, they demanded total unrestricted access with no logs or record keeping to show what they were up to. And within 15 minutes of this being granted, IPs from Russia began trying to log into these accounts with the correct names and passwords. It is currently unknown just exactly how much or what information Russia was able to download, but this could potentially be the single biggest information leak in history. In one move, Doge has done what hundreds of KGB agents could only dream of achieving throughout the Cold War. And their only response to this so far was to take drone footage of the whistleblower's house and tape it to his front door. The richest man in the world, everybody. ICE is now running around acting like the secret police and recently held an expo where they showcased companies who gleefully showed off their ability to build mass internment camps and crematoriums. He has failed in his promise to end the Ukraine war on day one, and instead, the great president of peace has so far threatened to declare war on Canada, Mexico, Panama, Denmark, France, Britain, Iran, and China if you include trade wars. Hello, it's post-production Laserpig here again. I forgot to add Greenland to that list, and you can also go ahead and add Yemen as well. I will say this. I am not coping and seething at Trump's victory, far from it. I get to sit on my shitty island and laugh, because originally, I was finding this cathartic. Okay, I was wrong about Musk in that previous video. I'll put my hands up, that's fine. I just thought he was being used for his money and his influence. I genuinely thought he'd be put out to pasture as soon as Trump came to power. I didn't realize Trump was going to make him the 47th and a half President of the United States of America. I didn't realize how stupid this was going to get. Look, we'd all been promised that this orange heffalump of a man was America's last hope for greatness, and as he took to the stage in front of all the chest-thumping brown shirts ready to deliver them to the promised land, he immediately slipped on a banana peel and started rolling down the stairs, making a bunch of comedic boing noises each time. And this has left his supporters slightly divided, with one half arguing relentlessly that all the boing noises are in fact part of some unseen master plan that us plebs cannot even possibly fathom, and the other half are doing their best Picard impressions. It was all fun and games, until I saw the camps.
Cremation equipment, waste to energy conversion, Regford structures, as well as for military and facility housing trusted by government, oh fuck me. Oh fuck me. Oh, fuck me.
Trump has, and I'll remind you, at the time of recording, we haven't even hit the first 100 days yet, has weakened the United States military position considerably, tanked the economy, practically ended its dominance in global trade, and left it vulnerable not only in its position to police its interests across the world, but united almost the entire world against it, as opposed to its enemies. Europe is rearming not to fight Russia, but to defend itself against America. Asia, which was once moving towards uniting with America against Chinese aggression and expansion, is now united with China against America. The only person in the world who has benefited considerably from Trump's administration is Putin. So the question has to be asked: if Trump was a Russian agent, what more could he have possibly done? Look, maybe I was wrong. Maybe color revolution theory does in fact exist. Maybe it does actually work. But maybe it wasn't the left who was the target. Maybe all this time, it was the right. Maybe y'all just got cultural Marxist by Putin. Or maybe the right just won the culture war, and maybe I really am coping and seething. Ooh, who knows? So go ahead. Post your little Pepe. You won. Well done. You deserve it. Good for you. Because as James Randi once said, and I've said it several times in this video already, some of the easiest people to fool are the people who think they are smart enough to notice if they were being fooled, and egotistical enough to never admit that they were fooled, but double down in the hope that they will be proven justifiably correct eventually. I mean, I do this to my haters all the time. I quite recently had a scare because I had to use DMCA laws to take something down from a website which proudly decided to show the letter that contained my real-life name and address for about 24 hours before I was able to get them to take it down. Now, okay, thankfully it was a very obscure website whose majority traffic don't know nor care who I am, but that page probably did show up in a Google search result, and there are people who hate me enough to Google search my name every single day, well into the obscure numbers, and post every new result as part of some great revelation. Every YouTuber gets this as just part of our glamorous lifestyle. But you know what obscures Google search results best of all? You know what the absolute best way of hiding things from people you don't want to be found? When all your haters are too busy bragging about a mistake you made on the internet, patting themselves on the back for a job well done, too proud to ask why I'd ping my entire Discord with this and not just slap it on my barely noticed blue sky like I always do. And then just to seal the deal, just in case there is any doubters, you let slip that you're doing all this just to troll a very specific person who you'll never name, because then they all think that you mean specifically them. Because there's a caveat to James Randi's theory about fools, as all the great cons tell us, from the wire scam to the cash and curry scam right down to the find a lady, the easiest people to fool think they're too intelligent to be fooled, are egotistical enough to never admit that they were fooled, and think, above all else, that they are the ones fooling you. And I'm an idiot online. I mean, if I can do this to pull the wool over your eyes, imagine what someone who is far more intelligent and has far more money than me could do. An editor put in picture of spooky ghost here. I don't have an editor. It's just me. Hang on. There. That works. So, what have we learned? Well, we've learned the world is complicated and stupid. And when faced with just how complicated and stupid everything is, people prefer to ignore it in favor of overly simplified explanations because it's easier to think that the simplest solution is the best one because the overly complicated problem is probably someone's fault. And if we just stop them, then the problem will go away. And if you don't know what the problem is, that's fine. There's a legion of people out there willing to not only tell you what the problem is, but sell you the solution to the problem, so long as it's not your fault, nor require you to do anything but be angry. We also learned that selling anger is very profitable and has been for a long time, and so long as you're angry, then you're not doing anything useful. So politicians have been abusing this to the point where we're all just living in hypernormalism, where actual reality no longer exists, but instead a much simpler, much more fun version of reality has been created, not because it's, well, easier to understand, but because it's also easier to sell to the public and helps keep you in power for longer. We live in a world where once-in-a-lifetime events happen almost every other day, because the complexity of life has become so unappealing that we would rather live in the simple world even if we know it's a delusion. So the problems never get solved, and the entire world has been slowly sleepwalking into fascism because the appeal of fascism has always been that it offers the simplest solutions to simple problems, and promises that one day we'll all be living in a nationalist utopia once all the bad people have gone away. And who the bad people are? Well, that's subjective and changes frequently because the reality is there are no bad people in smoky rooms specifically plotting your demise, just a bunch of idiots who think they understand the world a lot better than they actually do, selling you solutions that don't work to problems that don't exist. Bill Lind is lying to you. There's also a lot more I wanted to cover. I mean, there was this whole thing about how neo-Nazis aren't actually Nazis. It's actually closer to an Elvis tribute band imitating the aesthetics of Nazism, because that's all they really understand, and how this is distracting you from what real Nazis are actually doing. Look, the neos hate the Jews because the Nazis hated the Jews. But to actual Nazis, the Jews were just the hot-button topic of the day. They can be interchanged with whomever you like. These days it's typically immigrants because, well, you can be so easily convinced to see immigrants as a problem that needs to be solved as opposed to, you know, human beings. Which is how the Germans saw the Jews in the 1930s. The Jewish problem. They were a problem, not a people. I also wanted to cover a lot of the actual scams that have taken advantage of the right wing, my example being Donbass Devushka, or whatever her name was, who was pretending to be a pro-Russian Ukrainian live reporting from the Donbass, who later turned out to be a tropical fish salesman who had never left America. She basically took all the donation money for herself, and this is actually quite typical. You know, both con artists and marketing departments regularly take advantage of largely right-wing outrage for money. And it would be, okay, it would be wrong to say that that's exclusive to the right, but it is significantly worse on the right than it is the left. It's like comparing a matchstick to a forest fire. My examples largely focused on things like the Ghostbusters and Captain Marvel movies, where a near-fake situation of outrage was created in order to boost publicity for those films. Also that 99% of great right-wing thinkers are either grifters or snake oil salesmen or fundamental Christians or secret Nazis or just objective morons. Essentially, they all have agendas that they're trying to sell you, and things like, you know, truth or fact or reality tend to get in the way of that, so they have to defend the simplistic narrative tooth and nail, as it is as essential to their existence as water. Hence why they're all so fucking angry all the time. But by this point, this video was like 5.5 hours long, so I mean, I have a life, so I cut it back to what I thought was like the most important messages. I've never done a video like this before, and I did promise my Patreon that I'd do this a 1.5 years ago. So, you know, sign up to my Patreon. Clearly it's worth it. I mean, you give me money and I'll ignore you for over a year. I mean, but so maybe this worked. Who knows? Or maybe it didn't work and you hated it and I'll never do a video like this again, and you're sitting there going, well, you should have stuck to tanks, buddy. Even though I have never been a tanks channel, I'm just well known for that one tanks video. Or maybe this has worked. Maybe I've finally gotten through to you all and I'm a genius and all of society's problems have finally been solved. Huzzah! Or maybe I just don't know how to end videos.